Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was parked outside the north checkpoint a little after midnight, engine off, paperwork on the dash, just waiting for clearance to bring the tanker through. My name's Daniel Rios. I'd been hauling aviation fuel out to that base twice a week for almost a year. Most nights were boring. You sat there, watched the desert, tried not to fall asleep. It was late August, still hot even at night. The kind of heat that clings to the asphalt and makes everything smell like rubber and dust. No wind. No clouds. The sky was clear enough that the stars looked sharp. I remember because I was staring at them when I noticed something off near one of the distant hangars. From where I waited, you could see the outer row of buildings if you looked past the fence line and over the low rise. Most of the hangars sat dark at that hour. Every now and then you'd see headlights move or a door crack open, but that night it was quiet. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The air above one hangar looked like it was wavering, like heat rising off a highway in the middle of summer. But it wasn't the ground doing it. It was higher up, maybe 50 feet above the roof. I blinked a few times, took off my glasses and wiped them on my shirt. When I looked again, it was still there. It wasn't a glow. There weren't any lights. It was just a distortion. The stars directly above that hangar looked slightly bent, like you were looking at them through moving water. The outline of the building beneath it seemed softer too, almost blurred. I told myself it had to be heat coming off the roof. Maybe some kind of venting system, but it didn't look random. The distortion had edges. Not sharp edges exactly, but boundaries, like something large was sitting there, and the air around it was warping. I leaned forward in the cab and turned off the radio completely. I wanted to hear if there was anything, engines, rotors, anything at all. Nothing. The desert was dead quiet. I checked my phone for the time, 12:17 a.m. I remember that specifically because I considered texting my buddy Marco, who used to run this route before me, just to say, "You ever see anything weird out here?" But I didn't. It felt stupid. The distortion seemed to deepen. The air above the hangar shimmered harder, like when you open an oven door and that blast of heat hits you. The stars behind it bent more noticeably now. And the shape, if that's what it was, felt wider than the building itself. Still no sound. I stepped out of the truck. The heat from the day was still radiating up from the pavement. My boots made that soft crunch on gravel as I moved closer to the fence line, though I stayed well back from it. There were cameras everywhere. The last thing I needed was a guard thinking I was wandering around. From outside the cab, it was even clearer. It looked like a massive, invisible thing was parked above that hangar. Not floating high, just resting there, maybe 10 or 15 feet above the roof. The air around it rippled in layers. I could trace a rough curve along the top where the distortion seemed strongest. I tried to convince myself it was just thermal exhaust. Maybe something inside was venting hot air upward. But if that were true, there would have been steam, smoke, something visible. There was nothing. And then I noticed something else. The lights around that hangar, the small security floods mounted along the walls, looked dimmer than the rest. Not off, just slightly muted, like someone had turned them down. I checked the other buildings. Their lights looked normal. I started to feel this pressure in my chest, not pain, just this heavy awareness that I was watching something I wasn't supposed to be seeing. My phone buzzed in my hand. It made me flinch so hard I almost dropped it. It was just the dispatcher updating my wait time. 15 more minutes. When I looked back up, the distortion had changed. It wasn't as intense. It was shrinking, pulling inward toward the center point above the hangar. The air around it smoothed out gradually, like ripples settling on a pond. Still no sound, no sudden movement, just that shimmer fading. And right as the last of it disappeared, the hangar doors began to close. They hadn't been opened before. I was sure of that. I'd been looking at that building for at least 10 minutes. The doors had been sealed shut. Now they were sliding together slowly, the heavy metal panels meeting in the middle. No bright lights spilled out, no silhouettes, just darkness behind them. Once the doors sealed, the building looked completely normal. The lights along the walls brightened back to match the others. That was it. No roar of engines, no aircraft taking off, no vehicles moving in or out, just silence. I stood there for a while, waiting for something else to happen. I kept expecting to hear a delayed boom, see something shoot up into the sky. Nothing did. When clearance finally came through, I climbed back into the truck. My hands were shaking more than I wanted to admit. I told myself it was just the heat. As I rolled through the checkpoint, one of the guards, a guy I'd seen plenty of times before, name patch said Henderson, gave me this long look. Not suspicious, just measured. I almost asked him. Almost said, "Hey, what was that above hangar 4?" But I didn't know the hangar numbers for sure, and something about the way he was watching me made me keep my mouth shut. Inside the base, everything looked routine. A few trucks moving around, some distant headlights, the same quiet industrial hum as always. While I was hooking up the hose to offload the fuel, I glanced toward that hangar again. From this angle, it looked completely ordinary. Solid. Still. But I noticed the concrete around it looked darker than the rest, like it had been recently washed or sprayed down. I finished the delivery and left without saying anything to anyone. On the drive back down the highway, I kept checking my mirrors, not because I thought something was following me exactly. It was more like I felt exposed. About 20 miles out, my dashboard clock flickered. It blinked off for maybe a second, then came back on. I figured it was just a loose wire. The truck was old, but the time read 12:46 a.m. That didn't make sense. I knew I'd left the base around 12:35 at the latest. The drive to where I was should have taken 15 minutes, minimum. I checked my phone, 12:53 a.m., 7 minutes difference. I pulled over on the shoulder and just sat there with the engine idling. I tried to retrace the drive in my head. The checkpoint, the straight stretch past the hills, the dry lake bed on the right. I couldn't remember passing the lake bed. It was like that section of road just wasn't there in my memory. I told myself I'd zoned out. It happens on long desert drives at night. You slip into autopilot. I restarted the truck to reset the clock. It synced back up with my phone. I drove the rest of the way home with the radio off. I didn't tell Marco. Didn't tell my wife either. What would I even say? I saw invisible heat above a hangar and maybe lost a few minutes. But the next time I had that route 2 weeks later, I checked that same hangar. Different night, cooler weather, a little wind, nothing unusual. Still, I didn't park facing it anymore while I waited. I turned the truck the other direction toward the open desert and kept my eyes on the road instead. The first time it happened, I thought my hearing had gone out. My name's Roy Keegan. I worked night security on a long perimeter road that ran along the edge of a restricted section out in the desert. It wasn't a busy post. Most of the job was driving slow loops, checking fence lines, making sure nothing had been tampered with. Nights out there had a kind of constant noise to them. Wind moving across the ground, insects, especially in the warmer months. Sometimes you'd hear distant engines, either from inside the base or way off on the highway. It was never completely quiet. That night, I was parked at one of the turnarounds, engine off, just filling out a log. I remember hearing the wind first, a steady, low rush across the open ground. Then it just stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone had cut it out of the air. I noticed it immediately because it felt wrong. You don't get silence like that out there. Even when the wind drops, something fills the gap. But this was nothing. No insects, no distant hum, nothing at all. I looked up from my clipboard, sat there for a second, listening, waiting for something to come back. It didn't. Then I felt it, through the soles of my boots, a low vibration. Not strong, not enough to shake anything, just a steady, subtle pulse coming up from the ground. I shifted my feet, thinking maybe it was the truck idling nearby, but the engine was off. Keys out. Everything still. The vibrations stayed. I stepped out of the truck, stood on the gravel. It was clearer there. Not louder, exactly. Just more noticeable. Like the ground itself was carrying it. I crouched down, put my hand flat on the dirt. Same thing, a faint rhythmic pulse. Slow, even. I looked out across the fence line. Nothing moving, no lights, no vehicles. Just the dark stretch of desert. The sky was clear, stars visible. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. That silence held, heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. The vibration went on for maybe 30 seconds. Then, just like the sound had stopped, it came back. All at once. Wind, insects, a distant engine somewhere far off. The vibration disappeared at the same time. No fade, no transition, just gone. I stood there for a while, trying to process it. Then I got back in the truck and kept going. I didn't report it, didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I'd imagined it. The next few nights were normal. Same routine, same background noise, nothing unusual. Then it happened again. Different spot along the road. I was driving this time, maybe 15 miles an hour, just doing a pass. The sound cut out. Instant. Like before. I slowed the truck without thinking. Rolled to a stop. The silence hit first, then the vibration. This time I felt it through the steering wheel too. Faint, but there. Like a low hum traveling through the frame of the vehicle. I turned the engine off. Sat there, hands resting on the wheel, feeling that pulse. It wasn't random. There was a pattern to it. A steady spacing between each rise and fall. I tried to count it, 1, 2, 3, but it didn't line up cleanly. It was close, but not exact. The silence made it worse. Without any other noise, that vibration felt more pronounced, more present, like it was the only thing in the environment. I looked out toward the restricted area, same as before. No lights, no movement, nothing to suggest anything was happening. The vibration lasted about the same amount of time, maybe a minute. Then it stopped, and the sound came back, same as before, immediate, complete. I sat there a little longer that time, trying to see if anything else would follow. Nothing did. After that, I started paying attention to the conditions when it happened. Time didn't seem to matter. Location along the road didn't either. It wasn't tied to anything obvious. It just happened. Every couple of weeks, sometimes longer. Always the same pattern. Sound drops out completely. Vibration starts, then both return to normal. One night, I tried stepping away from the truck and walking out a bit, just to see if distance changed anything. The silence followed me. It wasn't localized. It covered everything. The vibration didn't get stronger or weaker, just stayed the same, consistent. I stopped about 20 yards from the road, stood there in the open, no sound, just that low pulse under my feet. I remember looking down at the ground, half expecting to see something. Movement, dust shifting, anything. There was nothing. The surface looked exactly the same, flat, undisturbed, but the feeling was still there, that subtle, steady pressure. I crouched again, pressed my hand into the dirt, same as before. The vibration was there, but the ground itself didn't move. It didn't make sense. If something was causing that, it should have shown in the surface, but it didn't. I stayed out there until it stopped, then walked back to the truck. The sound came back as I got closer, like stepping into a different environment, even though I knew I hadn't crossed anything. It was all the same space, just different for a short time. The last time it happened, I noticed something new. When the silence hit, I looked up right away. Something about the sky caught my attention. It wasn't obvious, not at first, but there was a section overhead where the stars looked off, not gone, not blocked, just slightly dimmer, like I was looking through a thin layer of something. It was hard to focus on. The more I tried to look directly at it, the less clear it became. But it was there, right above me, and it didn't move. The vibration was stronger that time. Still subtle, but enough that I could feel it in my chest as well as my feet. I stood there, staring up, trying to make sense of that patch of sky. Then everything snapped back. Sound returned. The stars looked normal again. The vibration was gone. I haven't seen that distortion again since. But the silence and the vibration, those still happened, same as before. No warning, no pattern I can figure out. Just the sudden absence of everything, followed by that low, steady pulse, coming from somewhere I can't see and gone again, before I can figure out what it's connected to or what it's doing beneath my feet. I only noticed it because I was trying to catch the light right before it disappeared. My name's Connor Hale. I do landscape photography, mostly out in remote places where you don't get a lot of light pollution. That trip, I'd set up a few miles outside a restricted zone in Nevada. Not right up against it, just close enough that you could see the edge of the hills where the land changed. It was late summer, hot all day, but cooling off fast once the sun started dropping. I'd been out there since the afternoon, setting up angles, checking framing, waiting for that short window where the sky shifts from bright to that softer orange and purple mix. The air was still, no wind, no insects, which I didn't think about at the time, just quiet. I had my camera on a tripod pointed west toward the hills, nothing unusual in the frame, just open sky, a faint ridge line, and the sun sitting low. I started shooting as the light changed, one frame every few seconds, adjusting settings as it dimmed. It was routine. I'd done it 100 times. Around the time the sun dipped below the ridge, the sky took on that flat, even glow you get just before it fades completely. That's when I took the shot. I didn't notice anything at the time. Just clicked the shutter, waited a second, clicked again. Same composition, same framing. I kept going for maybe another minute, then stopped. The light was gone. Nothing left to shoot. I stepped away from the camera, stretched, grabbed some water from the cooler in my truck. It wasn't until later when I started reviewing the images that I saw it. I was flipping through them on the camera screen. First few looked normal. Same sky, same colors, nothing out of place. Then I hit one where something felt off. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. The sky looked slightly uneven, like a section of it was darker, but not in a cloud kind of way. I zoomed in. There it was. A shape. Faint. Rectangular. Not perfectly sharp, but defined enough that it stood out once you saw it. It wasn't a cloud. Didn't have any texture. Didn't blend into the sky. It just blocked the light differently. Like something solid was there, but only visible because the fading sunlight hit it at an angle. I stared at it for a while, trying to figure out what I was looking at. The edges were straight, too straight for anything natural, and it wasn't small. It stretched across a good portion of the frame. Not close to the ground either. It was high up, higher than the ridgeline, higher than where any dust or debris would hang. I flipped to the next image. Same framing, same position, nothing there. The sky looked completely normal. I went back. Checked the previous shot, nothing. Just the one frame where it showed up. I sat down on the tailgate of my truck, scrolling back and forth between the images, trying to see if maybe it was a lens issue, a reflection, something on the sensor. But if it was, it should have appeared in more than one shot. This was isolated. One frame. I zoomed in further. The interior of the shape wasn't black. It wasn't empty. It just looked slightly different, like the light passing through that section was muted, as if there was something there altering it. I looked up from the screen and scanned the sky. It was already getting darker. Stars starting to show. Nothing unusual. No shapes. No movement. Just open sky. I stood there for a while looking between the sky and the camera, hoping maybe I'd catch something, but there was nothing. I packed up after that, drove a little farther out to where I was planning to camp, set up my gear, tried to shake it off, told myself it was probably some kind of artifact, even though it didn't behave like one. Later that night, I went back through the images on my laptop. The shape was still there, clearer on the bigger screen, that rectangular outline, perfectly still. No distortion around it, no blur, just a section of sky that didn't match the rest. I checked the metadata. Everything was normal. Exposure, shutter speed, aperture, nothing that would explain it. I pulled up the histogram. The values in that area were slightly lower, like less light had reached the sensor, but not by much, just enough to show a difference. I overlaid the images, aligned them perfectly, compared the frame with the shape to the one right after. They matched exactly, except for that one section. I leaned back in my chair, staring at it, trying to picture what could cause that. There wasn't anything. Not anything I'd ever seen. I went outside the tent, looked up again. The sky was clear, stars everywhere, no sign of anything blocking them. But I kept thinking about that frame, how whatever it was, it hadn't moved. It hadn't entered the frame, hadn't left it. It was just there, for that one moment, visible only because of how the light hit it, then gone, or at least invisible again. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that shape, hanging there, silent. The next morning, I went back to the same spot, set up the camera again, same angle, same framing, waited for the light to change, took the same sequence of shots. Nothing showed up, just normal sky. I checked every image, zoomed in on every section. Nothing. I went back again the next evening. Same thing. Normal. No shape, no distortion. Just sky. I've gone through those original images more times than I can count. Every time that one frame still stands out, that faint rectangular outline, too straight, too still. And the part I keep coming back to is how it didn't look like it was moving through the sky. It didn't look like it was passing by. It looked like it was already there. Like it had been sitting in that exact position the whole time. And the only reason I ever saw it was because the light hit it just right for 1 second before it blended back into the sky. And whatever it was went back to being something you couldn't see at all. The first time I noticed it, I thought something had gotten into the herd. My name's Eli Garner. I've got a small spread about 40 miles out from Groom Lake. Nothing fancy, just enough land to run cattle and stay out of the way. Nights out there are usually quiet. You hear wind, maybe coyotes, sometimes trucks way off on the highway. That night, I stepped outside because something felt off. I didn't hear anything at first. That was the thing. It was too quiet. Even the insects were gone. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out toward the fence line. The moon was up, so I didn't really need it, but I kept it on anyway. That's when I saw them. Every single cow was standing along the far fence. Not scattered, not grazing, all lined up, perfectly still, facing the same direction, toward the base. I stopped where I was. Just watched them. None of them moved. Not a head turn, not a step. Even the ones that usually wandered were there, just shoulder to shoulder, just staring. I called out, "Hey." Nothing. No reaction. That alone wasn't normal. Cattle always react to something. Sound, light, movement. These didn't. I started walking closer, slow, not wanting to spook them. Still nothing. No shifting, no lowing, just silence. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind picking up. But it wasn't. It had a rhythm. Low, faint, more like a feeling than a sound, a kind of pulsing hum. It rolled across the ground, not loud, but steady. I felt it in my chest more than I heard it in my ears. The cows didn't react to it. If anything, they seemed fixed on it. I followed the direction they were facing, out past the fence, across the open desert, toward the hills that hid the base. There was nothing visible. No lights, no movement, just darkness. But the hum kept coming. Slow pulses, even spacing. Each one pressed against me for a second, then faded. Then came the next. I stood there for a while, just listening, trying to figure out what it could be. No aircraft noise, no engines, no trucks, nothing I recognized. I checked the time, a little after midnight. I stayed out there maybe 10 minutes. The hum never changed, didn't get louder, didn't fade, just kept going. Then, all at once, it stopped. No taper, no fade out, just gone. Like someone flipped a switch. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. The cows stayed where they were, still lined up, still facing the same direction. I waited a minute, 2, then one of them shifted, just a small step. Then another turned its head. Within a few seconds, they all started breaking formation, walking away from the fence, going back to grazing like nothing had happened. I stood there watching them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Next morning, I checked the fence line. No damage, no tracks, nothing unusual in the dirt, just the same dry ground as always. I told myself it was a one-off, some weird thing, maybe distant machinery, maybe something I didn't understand. Then it happened again. About 3 months later, same thing. I stepped outside because it felt too quiet. Walked out, and there they were, all lined up. Same fence, same direction. This time I didn't call out, didn't get close, I just stood back and watched. The hum came a minute later. Same pattern. Same feeling in my chest, like pressure building and releasing. I looked toward the hills again, still nothing visible. But there was something about the sky that felt off. Not wrong exactly, just different. Like the darkness wasn't as deep as it should have been. I blinked a few times, tried to focus, couldn't see anything clearly. Just that faint sense that something was there. Out past where I could really make it out, the cows didn't move, didn't react, just stared. The hum went on longer that night, maybe 15 minutes, maybe more. I didn't check the time. I just stood there, counting the pulses in my head, trying to see if there was a pattern, if it meant anything. Then it stopped. Same as before, instant. The cows broke formation again, same slow return to normal, like they'd been released from something. After that, I started paying attention. Every few months, it would happen. Not on a schedule I could figure out, just random nights. Always after midnight, always the same behavior. Cows lining up, facing the base, silent. the hum rolling in from the distance. I tried staying inside one time, watching through the window. Same thing. They lined up anyway. The hum came. I could still feel it through the walls. Muted, but there. I stepped outside halfway through. The moment I did, it felt stronger, like stepping closer to a speaker. But there was no direction to it. It was just everywhere. One night, I brought a radio out with me. Thought maybe I'd catch interference. Something on the signal. When the hum started, the radio went quiet. Not static, not noise, just silence, like it had been turned off, even though it was still on. When the hum stopped, the sound came back. Same station, same volume, like nothing had happened. I stopped trying to explain it after a while. There wasn't anything that fit. No aircraft I knew sounded like that. No equipment, no natural cause. And the way the cattle reacted, that part bothered me the most. They didn't get scared. They didn't try to run. They just focused, like they were watching something. Something I couldn't see. The last time it happened, I stayed out there until just before sunrise. The hum had already stopped. The cows had gone back to normal. Everything felt quiet again. But as the sky started to lighten, I noticed something. Out toward the hills, just for a second. A faint glow, low to the ground. Not bright, not moving. Just there. Then the sun came up enough that it disappeared into the light. I stood there for a while after that, watching the same spot. Nothing else happened. Everything looked normal again. But now, every time it gets too quiet at night, I step outside and I check the fence line first. Because if they're all standing there, facing the same direction, I already know what's coming, even if I never see what they're looking at. I first saw it on a slow night when nothing else was happening. My name's Daniel Cross. I was a radar trainee at a small Air Force installation in Nevada. I wasn't tracking anything important yet, just learning the system, watching for patterns, getting used to reading the scope. Most nights were quiet. You'd sit there staring at a screen that barely changed. A few commercial flights way up high, the occasional military movement, nothing you couldn't predict. That night, it was dead. No traffic nearby, just a clean scope. I remember leaning back in my chair, half paying attention when something blinked into existence right at the center of the display. Directly above us. It wasn't a track, no trail, no movement, just a single return, a dot. Then it was gone. It lasted maybe a fraction of a second. I thought I'd imagined it. Or maybe it was a glitch. The system did weird things sometimes, noise, clutter, reflections. I didn't say anything. I just kept watching. A few minutes later, it happened again. Same spot, same thing. One brief return, then nothing. No build-up, no fade, just there, then gone. I leaned forward this time, checked the settings. Gain looked normal, filters were fine, nothing out of the ordinary. I tapped the screen lightly like that would somehow fix it. Then I waited. Another few minutes passed. Nothing. Then, there it was again. Same exact location, same altitude readout, high, higher than anything we normally tracked. And again, it didn't move, didn't drift, didn't arc, just appeared, then disappeared. I called over one of the other guys, Marcus. He'd been there longer. "Hey, you see that?" I asked. He walked over, looked at the screen. "What am I looking for?" I tried to explain. He shrugged. "Probably interference," he said. "From what?" He didn't answer that, just went back to his station. I kept watching. Now I was paying full attention. Every few minutes, it would happen again. Same place, same altitude, always directly above the base. It didn't show up anywhere else. Not entering the airspace, not leaving it, just existing for a split second. I started logging the times, just writing them down on a notepad. There was no clear pattern. Sometimes 2 minutes apart, sometimes 5, sometimes longer, but always came back. Same position, same behavior. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something else. Right before it appeared, the rest of the scope would dim slightly. Not enough to be obvious, just a subtle drop. Like the background noise dipped for a moment. Then the return would flash, then everything went back to normal. I thought maybe it was tied to the system itself, like some internal calibration. But it didn't line up with any scheduled process I knew about. I pulled up the system logs. Nothing unusual, no errors, no resets, everything looked clean. That made it worse somehow. If it had been a glitch, there should have been something, some kind of trace, but there wasn't. Later that night, I decided to zoom in tighter, focused the scope on that exact area, centered it, reduced everything else. I wanted to see if there was any movement I was missing. The next time it appeared, I caught it clearly. For that split second, it looked solid, not just a point. More like a shape, small but defined. Then it vanished again. No fade, no trail, just gone. I leaned back, staring at the screen. My hands felt a little off, like I'd been gripping something too tight. Marcus noticed. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." I didn't mention it again that night. At the end of the shift, I brought it up to the instructor. Told him I'd been seeing brief returns at extreme altitude, always over the base. He listened, nodded, didn't seem surprised. "Sensor interference," he said. "From what?" I asked. He gave the same answer Marcus had. "Could be anything, atmospheric conditions, equipment noise." "That precise?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Happens." Then he changed the subject. The next night, I was back on the same station. I didn't expect to see it again, but I did. First hour, same thing, same spot, same behavior. This time, I tried something different. I stepped away from the screen, stood behind it instead, just watching from a slight angle. When it appeared, I didn't just see it. I felt it, a brief pressure in my ears, like when you go up a hill too fast. It lasted as long as the return did. Then it was gone. I swallowed, trying to clear the feeling. It faded quickly. I went back to the controls, checked everything again, still nothing out of place. I started noticing small things after that. The room would get quieter right before it happened. Not silent, just less. Like the background hum of equipment dipped for a second. Then the return would appear. Then everything went back. It was subtle, easy to miss, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. Around 3 a.m., it happened again, but this time it lasted longer. Maybe half a second instead of a fraction. Long enough that I could see it clearly. It wasn't a perfect dot, it had a slight shape to it, like a rounded edge. Then it vanished. I stared at the spot where it had been, waiting for it to come back. It didn't, not for a while. When it finally did, it was the same as before. Brief, instant, gone. At the end of that shift, I checked the archived data. Went back through recorded passes, looked for anything similar. I found a few. Scattered, same location, same altitude, same behavior, always labeled as noise, always ignored. I asked the instructor about it again, showed him the logs. He glanced at them, then handed the tablet back. "Don't chase ghosts," he said. "It's just interference." After that, I stopped bringing it up, but I kept watching. Every night I was on that station, I saw it. Same place, same pattern, it never moved, never changed, just appeared right above us for a fraction of a second, like something was there, exactly there, and nowhere else, and whatever it was, it never traveled, never approached, never left. It just showed up like it had always been there, and we only caught it for a moment before it was gone again. I heard it right before the end of my shift, when everything was quiet and nothing was supposed to be coming through. My name's Aaron Velez. I worked base communications, mostly monitoring and logging traffic across a bunch of channels that never got used. It was a lot of waiting, a lot of static, and occasionally something routine that needed to be routed or recorded. That night had been completely dead. No inbound chatter, no scheduled comms, just the usual low hiss sitting in my headset while I filled out logs and watched the clock. There was one channel we weren't really supposed to touch unless instructed. It stayed active, but it never carried anything. I was told it was legacy, something left running for compatibility. It was always just static, same tone, same level. You could forget it was even there. Around 2:40 a.m., that static changed. At first it was subtle, a slight fluctuation like the signal dipped for a second. Then it came back. I remember adjusting my headset, thinking it was just a loose connection. Then it happened again, only this time it didn't return to normal right away. The static got thicker. That's the only way I can describe it. Like there was something layered underneath it. I leaned forward, hand on the console, watching the levels. Nothing spiked, no indicators lit up, but I could hear it, something inside the noise. Then it cut through. Just for a second, not clean, not clear, but distinct enough that I knew it wasn't static anymore. It sounded like multiple voices overlapping, not talking to each other, talking at the same time. Different tones, different rhythms, all stacked on top of each other. I couldn't make out words, just fragments, like syllables breaking apart before they formed. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds, then it snapped back to static, flat, normal. I just sat there, headset still on, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. I checked the recording buffer. Everything on that channel was automatically logged. I pulled up the last minute of audio, rewound it to just before the time I'd heard it, hit play. Static, nothing else. I rewound again, same result, just the usual background noise. I scrubbed through it manually. Second by second, there was no break, no distortion, no sign that anything had cut through. I leaned back, staring at the screen. I knew what I'd heard. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something you could miss. I checked the timestamp on my log, made sure I hadn't gotten the time wrong. Then I pulled a longer segment. 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after. Played the whole thing through. Nothing. Nothing. Just static. I took the headset off, held it in my hand for a second, then put it back on. The channel sounded normal again. Flat. Empty. I told myself maybe it hadn't been recorded properly. Maybe the system had glitched. But that didn't make sense either. If it was strong enough for me to hear it clearly, it should have been in the recording. I sat there for a while, waiting. The clock ticked over to 2:50, then 3. Nothing else came through. At 3:10, I heard it again. Same pattern. The static thickened. Then the voices, layered, over closer this time. Not louder, but more present, like they were right at the edge of being understandable. I caught something that almost sounded like a word, but it didn't hold together. It broke apart before I could pin it down. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then it was gone. Back to static. I didn't hesitate this time, went straight to the recording, rewound to the exact second, hit play. Nothing, just static. No change, no interruption. I tried slowing it down, adjusting the playback. Nothing showed up. I checked the system logs, no anomalies, no drop packets, no errors. Everything looked normal. I looked around the room. Empty. Just me. Same as always at that hour. I considered reporting it, but I didn't know how to explain it. Voices in static that don't record didn't sound like something that would go over well. Still, I made a note, logged the time, marked it as unusual audio artifact, kept it vague. The rest of the shift passed without anything else happening. I kept the headset on, listening, waiting. Nothing came back. Next night, I came in early, sat down at the same station, put the headset on before even logging in. The channel was the same, flat static, no variation. For the first few hours, nothing happened. I started to think maybe it had been a one-time thing, something weird in the equipment. Around 2:40 again, the static changed. Same subtle dip, same thickening. I didn't move this time, just listened. The voices came through again, clearer, not clearer in words, clearer in presence. There were definitely multiple sources, different pitches, some higher, some lower, all speaking at once. No pauses, no gaps, just continuous sound layered over itself. For a second, it felt like they were shifting, like certain parts came forward while others dropped back, but it never resolved into anything I could understand. Then it stopped. Same abrupt cut. I went straight to the recording again, same result, nothing there, just static. I started checking older logs, going back days, weeks, listening for anything similar. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect, flat, empty noise. But every now and then I thought I heard something, not as strong, not as clear, but enough to make me pause. Each time I checked the playback, there was nothing. Just the same static. After a few nights, I stopped trying to prove it, stopped checking the recordings, I just listened. It came back a few more times. Never at the exact same minute, but always around that same window, always on that channel, always layered, always gone before it could be understood. One night, I took the headset off during it, just to see if it was coming through the room speakers somehow. The moment I did, the sound dropped. I put it back on. It was still there, so it wasn't in the room, just the line. The last time I heard it, it lasted longer than usual, maybe 5 seconds. Long enough that I almost felt like I could separate the layers, pick out one voice from the rest. But every time I focused on one, it slipped, blended back in, like it didn't want to be isolated. Then it cut out, same as always. After that, it stopped happening. At least on my shifts. I stayed on that station another month, never heard it again. The channel went back to being what it always was, empty. But at every now and then when the static shifts just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, I catch myself listening a little closer, waiting to see if those layers come back. Like something is trying to push through, just enough to be heard, but not enough to be recorded, and never long enough to understand what it's saying. They didn't tell me what it was before I walked into the room. My name's Dr. Lila Grant. I worked as an aerospace materials consultant, mostly evaluating heat resistance and structural integrity for high-stress components. The kind of work where you test things until they fail, then figure out why. That was the job, figure out how things break. That day, I was brought into a facility I hadn't been to before. Smaller, more contained. No company logos, no usual paperwork waiting on the table. Just a single case sitting in the middle of the room. 2 people were already there when I walked in. One I recognized from a previous contract, a guy named Harris. The other didn't introduce himself. They didn't waste time. Harris opened the case and turned it toward me. Inside was a fragment, about the size of my hand. A regular shape, like it had broken off something larger. At first glance, it looked like metal. Dull gray, smooth in some places, rough in others, no visible grain, no layering, just solid. Heat test, Harris said, sliding a folder toward me. I opened it. The data didn't make sense. They'd taken that fragment through temperatures that should have caused visible change almost immediately. Oxidation, discoloration, surface deformation. There was none of that. The charts were clean, flat lines where there should have been variation. I flipped through the pages. Is this correct? I asked. Harris nodded. Repeated runs, same result. I looked back at the fragment. Can I handle it? He hesitated for a second, then said, go ahead. I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected, not by much, just enough to notice. The surface felt neutral, not cold, not warm. Even though it had supposedly gone through extreme heat testing, I turned it in my hand. The edges where it had broken weren't jagged. Not in the way you'd expect. They were uneven, sure, but not sharp. More like softened, as if the break hadn't happened all at once. I set it back down. What's the composition? I asked. We don't know, Harris said. You ran spectroscopy? I asked. He nodded. Inconclusive. That's not really an answer. It's the one we have. I went back to the data. There were multiple heat cycles logged, each one pushed further than the last, temperatures that would have warped most aerospace alloys, even specialized ones, but the measurements didn't change. No expansion, no contraction, no measurable shift in structure. I looked up. What's the origin? Harris and the other guy exchanged a quick glance. Aerial debris, Harris said. I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. Aerial debris from what? I asked. He shrugged slightly. Recovered material. That wasn't helpful. I flipped to the back of the folder. There were images. Close-ups of the fragment under different lighting. Microscopic views. The surface didn't show the kind of patterns I expected. No crystalline structure, no obvious alloy behavior. Just uniformity. Too uniform. I leaned back in my chair. Have you tested mechanical stress? I asked. Yes. And? No failure. At all? Not within the parameters we used. I closed the folder, then increased the parameters. Harris didn't respond right away. We're not asking you to design new tests, he said. We want your assessment. I looked at the fragment again. There's nothing here that behaves like a known material, I said. That's my assessment. He nodded slowly. Anything else? I hesitated, then reached out and touched the surface again. There was something about it. Something subtle, not a temperature difference, not texture, just presence, like it didn't fully match the environment around it. I pulled my hand back. Did you test for heat retention? I asked. Harris frowned. What do you mean? After the cycles, I said. Did it cool down at a normal rate? He checked the folder. Thermal readings were stable. Stable how? No significant change. I felt something shift in my chest when he said that. You heated this, I said, and it didn't change temperature? That's what the data shows. I looked back at the fragment. It was just sitting there, still, unremarkable. But that answer didn't sit right. Nothing behaves like that. Even materials that resist heat still register it. They still respond. This didn't. Can I see it after a run? I asked. Harris shook his head. Not part of today's session. That was the first time I got the sense they were limiting what I could see. Up until then, it had felt like a standard consultation. Now it didn't. I sat back, tried to organize my thoughts. Where was it recovered? I asked. Harris didn't answer immediately. Then he said, desert region. That narrows it down. That's all I can say. I nodded, didn't push further. There wasn't a point. They were giving me exactly what they wanted me to have. Nothing more. I wrote down my observations, kept it technical, avoided speculation, but I kept coming back to the same conclusion. It didn't behave like anything I knew, not just in terms of heat, in terms of presence, interaction, response, or lack of it. When I finished, Harris took the folder back, closed the case, just like that. Session over. I left the facility without another word. No follow-up scheduled. No further instructions. A few days later, I tried to look into it on my own. Checked the contact I'd been given. The number didn't connect. The email bounced. The whole contract trail was gone, like it had never existed. I went back through my notes. Everything I'd written still made sense. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. When I'd picked up that fragment, it hadn't felt like something that had been through extreme heat. It hadn't felt like something that reacted to heat at all. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like it wasn't just resistant, it was separate. Like whatever conditions you put it in, heat, pressure, anything, they didn't really apply, not in the way they should. Like it wasn't fully part of the same system. And whatever it had broken off from, wherever it had come from, it hadn't been shaped by the same rules that everything else we work with is. I only worked that hangar for about 3 weeks before they moved me somewhere else. My name's Victor Hale. I was a civilian janitor on contract, mostly cleaning offices and maintenance spaces on a base out in California. Nothing sensitive, at least that's what they told us. Most of the work was routine. Empty bins, mop floors, keep things presentable. The hangar I got assigned to wasn't like the others. It sat a little farther out, past the main cluster. You had to drive a service cart down a long stretch of pavement with nothing on either side. No foot traffic, no vehicles, no noise most nights. It was always quiet there. Too quiet. Inside, it was mostly empty floor space. A few pieces of equipment pushed against the walls, nothing that looked active. The lighting was dimmer than the other buildings too. Not broken, just low. There was a section near the back that was walled off, plain metal door, no window. No markings beyond a small number plate. I remember noticing it the first night because it didn't match the rest of the place. Everything else felt neglected but normal. That door looked maintained, clean, like someone actually cared about it. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another restricted area. We were told not to go where we weren't assigned, so I didn't. The first week passed without anything unusual. Same routine every night. Come in, clean the main floor, take care of the office space near the entrance, leave. Then one night I noticed the light. I was mopping near the back wall, maybe 20 feet from that door. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something shift along the floor. At first, I thought it was just the overhead lights flickering. They did that sometimes. But when I looked directly at it, I saw a thin line of white light coming from underneath the door. It wasn't bright, just a narrow strip along the bottom edge. But it wasn't steady either. It pulsed. Faint, like distant lightning. No sound, just the light changing. I stopped mopping and stood there for a second, watching it. The rest of the hangar stayed dim. Only that line of light was moving. I took a few steps closer. The light flickered again, stronger this time. For a split second, it filled the gap completely, like something bright was right behind the door. Then it dropped back down to that thin line. I listened. Nothing. No voices, no machinery, no footsteps, just silence. I got closer, maybe 5 feet away. The light pulsed again, same pattern, not random, almost spaced, like it had a rhythm. I felt something in my chest when it happened. Not pain, just a kind of pressure, subtle but there. I crouched down slightly, trying to see if I could catch anything through the gap. There was nothing visible beyond the light, just brightness. No shadows, no movement. I stood back up, the light flickered again. I checked the time on my watch. Just after 1 a.m., I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe more. Then it stopped. The light disappeared completely. The gap under the door went dark, like it had never been there. I stayed where I was for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing came back. The hangar felt even quieter after that, like the air had settled. I finished my shift, but I kept looking back toward that door. Nothing else happened that night. Next shift, I went in a little earlier. Part of me didn't want to see it again. Another part of me did. I went straight to the back, started working in that area first. The door looked the same, closed, no light, no sign of anything. I kept glancing at it while I worked. Around the same time as the night before, it happened again. That thin white line appeared under the door. Same flicker, same pattern. I didn't get as close this time. I just watched from a distance. The pulses felt more noticeable now, like each one carried that same pressure in my chest. Not stronger, just clearer. I tried to count the timing. It wasn't perfectly even, but it wasn't random either. There was something consistent about it. After a minute or so, it stopped again. Dark. Silent. I didn't tell anyone right away. Figured maybe it was some kind of electrical issue, or something running behind that wall. But it didn't feel like that. On the third night, I decided to mention it. I caught my supervisor during the handoff, told him I'd seen light coming from under the back door, asked if there was work being done in there overnight. He looked at me for a second, then said, "What door?" I explained. Back wall, number plate, no window. He frowned, pulled up something on his tablet, scrolled for a bit, then shook his head. "That area's inactive," he said. "Permanently inactive." I told him about the light, the flickering. He didn't react much, just said, "Probably reflection." That didn't make sense. There was nothing bright enough in the hangar to cause that kind of light, and it was coming from under the door, not reflecting off it. The next night I went back again. Same routine, same time. The light appeared again. I stood farther away this time, didn't move toward it, just watched. At one point, during one of the brighter pulses, I thought I saw something shift behind the light. Not a shape, not clearly. Just a change, like something had passed between the light source and the door. But there was no sound, no shadow, just that brief interruption. Then it went back to normal. After that night, I got reassigned. No explanation. Just told I'd be cleaning offices closer to the main buildings. I never went back to that hangar. But the part that stayed with me was how that light didn't behave like anything I knew. It wasn't leaking from a room, it wasn't spilling out, it felt contained. Like whatever was making it was right up against that door, just on the other side. Close enough that the only place it could escape was that thin line along the floor. And even then, only for a few seconds at a time, before it pulled back and left everything dark again. I noticed it because it didn't match anything else on the system. My name's Daniel Price. I worked night shifts monitoring grid load for a regional utility. Nothing exciting most nights, just watching numbers, logging irregularities, making sure nothing drifts too far out of range. You get used to patterns. Factories ramp up and down at certain times. Residential usage dips overnight. Everything has a rhythm to it, so when something doesn't fit, it stands out. The first time I saw it, I almost ignored it. A spike on one of the substation feeds. Sharp, clean, not gradual like normal usage. It jumped up, held steady for a few minutes, then dropped back to zero. I pulled up the details. The load was coming from a small branch tied to an older building on the edge of an industrial park. The building had been flagged as inactive for months. No tenants, no scheduled maintenance, no reason for any load at all. I checked the timestamp. 1:02 a.m. to 1:07 a.m. 5 minutes. Exact. I figured it was a sensor glitch. Happened sometimes. Logged it and moved on. A few nights later it happened again. Different night, same building, same pattern, sharp spike, flat line at the top, then back to zero. This time it started at 1:01, ended at 1:07. 6 minutes. I pulled the logs more carefully. Checked for any scheduled work. Nothing. No crew access, no maintenance tickets, no alarms tied to the building either, no doors opening, no systems activating. Just that power draw. I started keeping an eye on it after that. It didn't happen every night. Sometimes it would skip a few days, sometimes a week. But when it did happen, it was always between 1 and 1:07. Never outside that window, and always the same kind of spike. No ramp up, no tapering off, just on, then off, like something flipping a switch. I mentioned it to one of the other guys, Carl. He shrugged it off. Probably bad data, he said, or someone forgot to update the building status. But the numbers didn't look like bad data. They were too clean, too consistent. I started pulling historical records, went back months. The pattern was there, not regular enough to predict, but consistent in how it behaved. Always that window, always that building. I looked into the building itself, old storage facility, been empty for at least a year. No active contracts, no known power usage, but the feed was still live, for emergencies, I guess, or because no one bothered to shut it down. I decided to check it in person. Next time I had a night off, I drove out there, around midnight. Figured I'd get there early and wait, see if anything actually happened. The industrial park was dead quiet at that hour. Rows of dark buildings, empty parking lots. A few distant lights from other facilities still running, but nothing near this one. I parked across the street, engine off, lights off, just sat there. The building looked exactly how you'd expect. Dark, no movement, no signs of activity. Windows were blacked out, doors closed. Nothing. I checked the time, 12:53. Still a few minutes to go. I leaned back in the seat, watching, waiting. The air outside felt still. No wind, no sound. Even the usual distant hum from other buildings seemed muted. One hit. Nothing happened. The building stayed dark. I checked my phone, 101. Still nothing. Then I noticed something subtle. A faint glow, not from inside the building, from around it, like the edges were slightly brighter than the surroundings. I sat up straighter, focused on it. The glow wasn't strong, barely noticeable, but it was there, outlining parts of the structure, especially near the roof line. I glanced at the time again. 1:02. Right when the spike should have started, the glow held steady. Didn't flicker, didn't spread, just sat there. I got out of the car, stepped onto the pavement. The air felt off. Not colder, not warmer, just different. Like pressure had shifted slightly. I walked a few steps closer, stayed on the opposite side of the street, didn't want to get too close. The glow was clearer now, still faint, but definitely there. It wasn't coming from inside. It looked like it was just surrounding the building. I checked my phone again, 1:04. The glow hadn't changed, no movement, no sound. I listened, nothing. No generators, no machinery, no electrical buzz, just silence. I took another step forward. The pressure in my ears shifted, like going up in elevation. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The glow seemed slightly brighter now, not by much, just enough to notice. I stared at the building, trying to see if anything inside was causing it, but the windows were still completely dark. At 1:07, it stopped, instantly. The glow vanished. No fade, no transition, just gone. The building went back to looking completely dark, normal. The air felt lighter again. The pressure in my ears eased. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I checked my phone, 1:08. I stayed there a bit longer. Walked a few steps closer to the building. Everything looked normal. No signs of power use, no heat, no noise, nothing. I went back to the car, drove home. The next night, I checked the system logs again. There it was, same spike. 1:02 to 1:07, exactly when I'd seen the glow. No variation, no explanation. I never found out what was drawing that power. No records, no activity logs, nothing. And the part that still doesn't sit right with me, is how the usage wasn't fluctuating at all during those minutes. It was perfectly steady. Like whatever was pulling that power wasn't running equipment, wasn't cycling, wasn't behaving like anything normal, just holding at a constant level for a fixed amount of time before stopping completely, like it only needed that exact window and nothing more. We hit it about 4 feet down, right when the sun was starting to come up. My name's Travis Morrow. I worked on a small maintenance crew contracted to handle underground water lines around a restricted perimeter zone out in the desert. Most of the time it was boring work. Dig, patch, cover it back up, move on. That morning it was just me, Nate, and our supervisor, Cole. We were fixing a pressure drop along one of the older lines, not far from a fenced-off section we weren't supposed to get too close to. Still within our work area, though. Nothing unusual about the location. The ground out there was hard, packed sand with a layer of rock underneath. You had to break through it in stages. We'd been digging for about 20 minutes when Nate's shovel hit something that didn't sound right. Not rock, not pipe. It made this dull, flat kind of sound. He stopped and looked down. Probably scrap, he said. Stuff got buried out there all the time. Old equipment, debris, whatever got left behind years ago. He cleared a little more sand away. Hit it again. Same sound. I stepped over and knelt down, brushing away some of the loose dirt with my hand. At first I thought it was just a sheet of metal, but it didn't look like anything I'd seen before. It was smooth. Too smooth. No rust, no scratches, no seams, just a clean, flat surface. Kind of dull gray, but not like steel. More like it absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. I tapped it with the handle of my shovel. Same dull sound, no vibration, no echo. Just solid. Pipe's not supposed to be here, Nate said. I checked the layout we'd been given. He was right. The line we were working on ran a few feet to the side of where we were digging. Whatever this was, it wasn't part of the system. Cole walked over, crouched down next to us. "What'd you find?" I pointed at it. He stared at it for a second. Didn't say anything right away. Then he stood up and looked around like he was checking where we were. "Clear more of it," he said. We kept digging, carefully this time. We didn't want to damage it, whatever it was. As we uncovered more, it became obvious this wasn't just a piece of scrap. It kept going, flat in every direction, no edges, no corners, just a continuous surface buried under the sand. We cleared maybe 3 feet across, same material, same texture, no markings, no bolts, nothing to suggest how it got there or what it was attached to. I ran my hand across it. It was cool, colder than the surrounding ground, even though the sun had been hitting that area. That didn't make sense. Everything out there heated up fast once the sun came up, but this felt like it had its own temperature. Nate noticed it too. "Feels like it's underground deeper," he said, "like it's pulling heat." I nodded. It did feel like that. Like the coolness wasn't just surface level. Cole told us to stop digging for a second. He pulled out his phone, stepped a little ways off, and made a call. We couldn't hear what he was saying, just that his tone had changed. More serious, short sentences. He kept looking back at the hole while he talked. After a minute or so, he came back. "Fill it in," he said. Nate blinked. "What?" "Fill it in," Cole repeated. "We're done here." "That's not part of the job," Nate said. "We haven't even found the line yet." Cole didn't argue. Just said, "Orders came down. We're done." I looked at him. "From who?" He didn't answer that. Just grabbed a shovel and started pushing dirt back into the hole. That was enough to shut the conversation down. We joined in. It felt wrong, covering something like that without even checking what it was, but none of us pushed it further. We filled it back in fast. Didn't take long. The sand went back over it like it had never been uncovered. By the time we were done, there was no sign anything had been there. Just a patch of disturbed ground that would blend in within a day or two. We packed up and left. Didn't fix the line, didn't log the find, nothing. Later that day, I checked the work order. The job had been marked as completed, no notes, no mention of the interruption, just done. I asked Cole about it at the end of the shift. He kept it short. "Not our problem," he said. "You don't ask questions about stuff like that." That stuck with me. The next morning, I drove back out there on my own, early, before anyone else was around. I found the spot pretty easily. The ground looked normal again. No obvious signs of digging, just the same flat desert. I stood there for a while, looking at the area where we'd uncovered that surface, trying to figure out if I'd imagined parts of it. But I hadn't. I knew what I'd seen. I brought a metal rod with me, something to probe the ground. I pushed it down where the surface had been. It went through the sand easily at first. Then it stopped, same depth as before. I pushed harder. It wouldn't go any further. I tapped it. Same dull sound Nate's shovel had made. Flat. Solid. Still there. I left it alone after that. Didn't dig again. Didn't tell anyone. But every time I worked near that perimeter after that, I started noticing small things. Areas where the ground felt slightly cooler underfoot. Places where the sand didn't shift the way it should. Nothing obvious. Nothing you could point to and say was wrong. Just subtle differences. Like something was underneath, not part of the landscape. Not something that had been built recently. Something that had been there longer than any of us knew, buried just deep enough that you'd never find it unless you happened to hit it in exactly the right spot and then be told to cover it back up before you could figure out what it was. We were just sitting out back killing time when it happened. There were 4 of us. Me, Tyler Briggs, Mateo Ruiz, and Collins. We all lived in the same row of base housing, right near the edge of the airfield. You could see the runway lights from the backyards if you stood in the right spot. It was late, maybe around midnight. Not freezing, but cold enough that we had hoodies on. Sky was clear, no clouds, and you could see a lot more stars than usual because most of the base lights dimmed down overnight. We did that a lot, just sat outside, talked, watched planes when they came in late. Except that night, there weren't any. No takeoffs, no landings. The runway lights were on, but everything else felt off. Quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. Mateo pointed it out first. "Feels dead tonight," he said. Tyler laughed and said something about everyone finally doing their jobs right for once. But I noticed it too. Usually you hear something in the distance. Engines, vehicles, something. That night, nothing. We were sitting there for maybe 20 minutes when Collins nudged me. "Hey," he said, low. "You see that?" I followed where he was looking. At first I didn't. Then I saw it. Small, white, way up high. Not blinking like a plane, just a steady point of light. It wasn't moving fast either. Actually, it looked like it was drifting downward. Slow. Too slow for anything I'd ever seen. Tyler stood up. "Helicopter?" he said. Mateo shook his head. No sound. That was the weird part. Even that high up, you usually hear something. This was completely silent. We all stood there watching it. It kept coming down. Not in a straight drop, more like a controlled descent. Smooth, no wobble, no change in brightness, just slowly getting lower. I remember checking the runway. Still nothing. No activity, no vehicles moving, no lights shifting. The thing got lower, low enough that we could tell it was over the runway area. Still no sound. It stopped. That's the part that stuck with me the most. It didn't slow to a stop. It just stopped. Like someone paused it midair, hovering. Maybe 50 feet above the runway, if I had to guess. Hard to judge distance at night, but it wasn't high anymore. Just sitting there, perfectly still. We all just stared. No one said anything for a few seconds. Then Tyler goes, "Okay, what the hell is that?" Mateo pulled his phone out and tried to zoom in. "I can't get anything," he said. "It's just blowing out the image." I tried mine too. Same thing. It just looked like a white dot on the screen. Nothing else. No shape. No detail. In person, though, it looked different. Not like a light shining outward, more like a solid point. Like it had edges, but too faint to define. It hovered there for a while. Longer than it should have. I checked my watch at one point. It had been almost a minute. No movement, no sound. Nothing. Then I noticed something else. The air felt heavy. Not in a dramatic way, just slightly harder to breathe. Like humidity had spiked, except it hadn't. I swallowed and my ears popped a little. I looked at the others. Tyler was rubbing his jaw. Mateo was still holding his phone up, but he'd stopped recording. Collins just kept staring. Then without warning, it moved. Not sideways, not down. Straight up. Fast. But not like a rocket. There was no trail, no acceleration curve. It was just suddenly higher, then higher again. In less than a second, it was back up where we'd first seen it. Then it kept going, up into the sky, and then it was gone. No fade, no blink, just gone. We all stood there for a few seconds after, waiting, like maybe it would come back. It didn't. The quiet stayed for a bit. Then slowly, normal sounds came back. Distant hums. A vehicle somewhere far off. Tyler finally said, "Did anyone else just see that?" We all nodded. Mateo checked his phone again. The video he'd tried to take was useless. Just a white speck that didn't show the movement properly. Collins said something about reporting it. Tyler laughed it off at first, but you could tell he wasn't comfortable. I didn't say much. I just kept looking at the runway. It looked completely normal again, like nothing had been there. The next morning, I asked around, tried to keep it casual, mentioned seeing something over the runway. One of the guys from operations just shook his head. "No flight scheduled overnight," he said. "No exercises either." I asked if anything had been in the air at all. He checked something on his tablet, then said, "Nothing logged." Later that day, we all got pulled aside. Not officially, just a quick conversation. One of the supervisors asked if we'd seen anything unusual the night before. We told him. He didn't react much, just nodded, wrote something down and said, "Probably atmospheric." Then he added, "There were no flights." That part stuck with me, the way he said it. Flat. Final. Like that was the only detail that mattered. That night, I went back outside around the same time, stood in the same spot, looked at the same stretch of sky. Everything looked normal. Stars were where they should be. Runway lights steady, no movement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I kept watching long enough, something might come back down and stop in that exact same spot, like it knew where to go and how long to stay before leaving again, just as silently as it arrived. I was about 3 hours into the shift when I first saw it. My name's Chris Mallory. I worked overnight security at a private airfield out in Arizona. Mostly cargo traffic during the day, nothing at night except the occasional late arrival. My job was just monitoring cameras, doing perimeter checks, and logging anything out of the ordinary. Nights out there were slow. You get used to staring at screens for hours with nothing happening. That's why it stood out right away. I had the thermal feed up on one of the monitors, just part of the rotation. The tarmac was empty, flat, still holding some heat from the day. On thermal, it showed up as a kind of dull orange-red across the surface, cooling slowly. Then I saw a darker patch. At first, I thought it was just the ground cooling unevenly. But it moved, slow, deliberate. I leaned forward in my chair. The shape wasn't clear at first, just a cold spot, darker than everything around it. But it wasn't random. It had direction. It was moving across the tarmac from one side toward the center. I adjusted the zoom slightly. The image got grainier, but I could see more detail. The shape looked off, not round, not square, kind of elongated. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. There was nothing out there physically, no person, no vehicle, nothing on the regular camera feed. I switched over to the normal view. Empty. Back to thermal, the cold spot was still there, still moving. I checked the temperature scale. The ground was reading around 80 degrees, still holding heat. The spot was significantly lower, closer to ambient air temperature, maybe even a little below. That didn't make sense. Out there at that time of night, nothing should have been colder than the air unless it was actively cooled. And there was nothing out there. I picked up the radio. Unit 3, you copy? I said. A pause then, go ahead. Got something on thermal out on the tarmac, I said. Can you swing by and take a look? Copy, on my way. I set the radio down and kept watching. The shape kept moving, slow, steady, not erratic, not drifting. It had a path. That's when I started noticing the outline. It wasn't clear, but it suggested something. A vertical shape, taller than it was wide. It didn't look exactly like a person, but it wasn't far off either. I felt a slight tension in my chest. Not panic, just that quiet awareness that something wasn't right. I switched cameras again, different angle, still nothing visible. Back to thermal, still there. I checked the timestamp, everything was synced, no lag, no glitch. The radio crackled. Approaching the area, Unit 3 said. I watched the feed, the cold spot didn't react, didn't change speed, didn't stop, it just kept moving. Do you see anything? I asked. Negative, he said. Tarmac's clear. I looked at the screen. The spot was about 50 feet in front of where he should be. Move about 10 yards forward, I said. You should be right on top of it. He moved. I could see his heat signature on the thermal feed. Bright, clear, walking right toward the darker shape. The cold spot didn't change. It didn't move around him, didn't disappear. It just overlapped. For a second, both signatures occupied the same space. Then Unit 3 walked past it. Still nothing, he said. I swallowed. Hold position, I said. He stopped. The cold spot was now behind him. Still moving, same pace, same direction. Turn around slowly, I said. Heed anything? I asked. No, he said. What am I looking for? I hesitated. I didn't know how to answer that. Just stand by, I said. I kept watching. The shape continued across the tarmac, heading toward the far edge. Unit 3 stayed where he was. Didn't see it. Couldn't see it. Only the thermal feed showed it. I noticed something else then. The edges of the shape were more defined now. Still not sharp, but consistent, like it had a form. Not changing, not flickering. Just there. Moving. I felt that pressure in my ears again. Same kind you get when you change elevation too fast. I rubbed the side of my head. It didn't go away right away. The hum of the monitors seemed louder, or maybe everything else was just quieter. I couldn't tell. The cold spot reached the edge of the tarmac. Then it slowed, just slightly. Not stopping, just easing. And then it was gone. No fade, no breakup, just gone. One frame it was there, next frame, nothing. The ground looked uniform again, cooling normally, no trace. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the screen, waited. Nothing came back. Unit 3, I said into the radio. Yeah? You can clear, I said. He sounded relieved. Copy that. I sat there for a while after, replayed the footage, multiple times, same result every time. The shape moved exactly the same way. Same speed, same path, then disappeared at the same spot. I checked the logs, no anomalies, no alerts, nothing flagged. The system didn't register it as anything unusual, just part of the background. The next night, I kept the thermal feed up longer. Watched that same section of tarmac. Nothing happened. Night after that, same thing. No cold spot, no movement. Everything normal. But I couldn't shake the image of it, that shape, moving across the ground without being there. And the part that stayed with me was how it didn't react to anything. Not the patrol, not the environment, not even the overlap when someone walked through it. It just followed its path, steady, unchanged, like it was moving through something different than the rest of us, on a track I couldn't see and only showed up for those few minutes before continuing on somewhere beyond the edge of the frame. I was halfway through repainting a set of runway markers when I felt it before I heard anything. My name's Luke Henson. I do contract work, mostly maintenance jobs out in remote areas. That week I was working at a dry lakebed airstrip out in Nevada. Nothing fancy, just a long stretch of cracked earth that doubles as a runway for test flights and occasional military use. It was late afternoon, just before sunset. Still hot, but the kind of heat that's starting to let go a little. The air was dry enough that every step kicked up a bit of dust. I'd been out there most of the day with a couple of guys, but they'd headed back early to grab supplies. I stayed behind to finish one last section so we wouldn't fall behind schedule. So it was just me out there. No vehicles running, no planes, nothing but flat land stretching out in every direction. I was crouched down, touching up the edge of one of the markers when I felt this low pressure in my chest. Not pain, just weight, like someone pressing a hand flat against my sternum. I stopped what I was doing and sat back a bit. That's when the sound hit me. Calling it a sound doesn't really feel right. It wasn't loud. It didn't come through my ears the way normal noise does. It felt like it was inside me. A deep, steady hum. So low it almost didn't register as sound at all. More like vibration. I stood up slowly, looking around. The lakebed was completely empty. No vehicles approaching, no aircraft overhead. Sky was clear, just a few thin clouds way off in the distance. The hum didn't change, didn't get louder or quieter. It just was. Constant. I took a few steps forward, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I noticed the dust. At first I thought it was just a breeze, but the air around me was still. The dust wasn't moving randomly either. It was lifting. Straight up, in a circle, about a few hundred yards out from where I was standing. I squinted, trying to get a better look. The circle was clean, too clean. Not a loose shape, a defined edge, like someone had drawn it on the ground. The dust inside that circle was rising slowly, evenly, not swirling, not blowing outward, just lifting straight up. I felt that pressure in my chest again, stronger this time. The hum deepened, still not louder, just heavier. I took a step back without thinking. My boots crunched against the dry ground. The circle stayed perfectly still in shape, but the dust kept lifting. I could see more of it now, fine particles rising maybe a few feet before just hanging there, like they'd hit something invisible. I looked up. There was nothing there, just open sky. But the dust wasn't going any higher. It was stopping at the same level all the way across the circle, like it was hitting a ceiling I couldn't see. I remember thinking I should get closer, figure out what the hell I was looking at, but something about it didn't feel right. The hum was making it hard to focus. My chest felt tight. My ears had that same pressure you get when you're in an elevator. I swallowed, but it didn't clear. I stayed where I was, just watching. The circle didn't move, didn't expand, didn't shrink. It just held there. Perfect. Then I noticed something else. The light inside the circle looked off. Not brighter, not darker, just slightly different. Like the air itself was thicker, distorted maybe. I tried to look through it to the ground on the other side. It wasn't clear. Everything inside that space looked just a bit warped. The hum shifted, not in pitch, but in feeling. It pulsed once, deep, like it rolled through me. The dust inside the circle dropped instantly, all of it, back to the ground at the exact same time. The hum stopped, just like that. Gone. The pressure in my chest lifted, my ears popped, the air felt normal again. I stood there trying to process what I'd just seen. The ground where the circle had been looked untouched. No marks, no discoloration, nothing. Just the same cracked surface as everywhere else. I walked a few steps closer, carefully, half expecting something to happen again. Nothing did. I reached the edge of where I thought the circle had been, kicked at the dirt with boot. It scattered normally. No resistance, no change. I crouched down, ran my hand over the ground, dry, warm from the sun, exactly like the rest of the lake bed. I stood back up and looked around again, still no sign of anything. No sound, no movement, just that empty stretch of land. The guys came back about 20 minutes later. I didn't say anything at first, just finished up the marker and packed my stuff. Um, on the drive back, I mentioned it, tried to keep it casual. They joked about it, said it was probably heat distortion or some kind of weird wind pattern, but there hadn't been any wind. And the way the dust moved, it didn't match anything like that. That night, lying in the motel, I could still feel it. Not the hum itself, but the memory of it. That weight in my chest, like something had been pressing through me instead of around me. I checked the time when I'd stopped working, tried to line it up with when they'd left. It didn't quite add up. Felt like less time had passed than it should have, or maybe more. Hard to pin down. The next day I went back out to the same spot, looked for anything I might have missed. Tracks, marks, anything. There was nothing, just flat ground, like it had never happened. But when I stood there in the same place for a second, I thought I felt it again. Not the full hump, just the faintest hint of pressure, like something far away, lined up exactly with that spot. And for a moment, I was standing right under it again. I was working nights in the clinic when they brought him in. My name's Eric Daly. I used to be a medic on a base out in New Mexico. Small place, mostly support and testing work. Nothing you'd hear about unless you were stationed there. Most nights were slow, minor injuries, dehydration, the usual. That night, it was around 2 a.m. when security came in with a guy I hadn't seen before. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Name was listed as Nolan Greer. He wasn't in uniform, just standard technician coveralls. He didn't look hurt, but something was off. His face was pale in a way that didn't match the heat outside, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like someone was following him. One of the guards gave me a quick rundown. Found him disoriented, he said. Says he needs medical. That was it. No details, no urgency in his tone either. Just routine. I got Nolan into one of the exam rooms. Had him sit down, checked his vitals. Everything was mostly normal. Heart rate a little elevated, but not extreme. Breathing steady, no visible injuries. You feeling dizzy? I asked. He nodded, then shook his head like he wasn't sure. Not dizzy, he said. Just off. His voice sounded strained, like he'd been talking for a long time before he got there. I asked him what happened. At first he hesitated, kept looking toward the door, then he leaned forward slightly. I was working, he said, inside one of the chambers. I didn't know what he meant by that exactly, but I didn't press. Doing what? I asked. Maintenance checks, he said. Routine. He swallowed hard. The lights flickered. That didn't sound unusual on its own. Power fluctuations happen. But the way he said it made it feel like it mattered. How long did they flicker? I asked. Couple seconds, he said. Maybe less. He rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them up. It wasn't the lights, he added quietly. Not really. I waited, didn't interrupt. He kept his voice low. Everything dimmed at once, he said. Not just overhead, panels, indicators, everything. I made a note of it. Still sounded like a power issue. Then he said, I thought I saw something. That got my attention. Where? I asked. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should answer. Then he pointed toward the wall behind me. Through the glass, he said. I turned slightly, even though there was nothing there but the clinic wall. What kind of glass? I asked. Thick, he said, like reinforced. Observation panel. I nodded, trying to keep it neutral. What did you see? He took a breath. A shape, he said. His eyes flicked back to the door again. Faint, not clear. He held his hands up slightly, like he was trying to frame it. It didn't move right, he said. I asked him what he meant. He shook his head. I thought it was my reflection, he said. At first, that made sense. Low light, reflective surfaces, easy to mistake things. But it wasn't matching me, he added. I felt a slight shift in the room then. Not physically, just the tone of the conversation. How so? I asked. He leaned back a little. Delay, he said, or something like that. He rubbed his face. I moved, he said. It didn't, or it moved different. I didn't say anything, just let him keep going. It was there for a second, he said, maybe 2. He swallowed again. Then the lights came back. And it was gone, I asked. He nodded. Yeah, I wrote that down. Part of me was already filing it under stress response, fatigue, overwork. People see things sometimes, especially in environments like that. Still, I asked, did you feel anything else, before or after? He hesitated, then said, pressure. Where? Head, he said. Ears. He tapped the side of his skull lightly, like when you go underwater too fast. I made a note of that too. His vitals still looked fine. No signs of concussion, no fever, no obvious cause for what he was describing. Did you lose consciousness at any point? I asked. No. Lose track of time? He paused. I don't think so, he said. But the way he said it didn't sound certain. I was about to ask more when there was a knock on the door. One of the guards stepped in slightly. Everything good? He asked. I said we were still checking him out. The guard nodded, but didn't leave right away. He just stood there for a second, looking at Nolan. Then he stepped back out and closed the door. When I turned back, Nolan's posture had changed. He was sitting straighter, hands flat on his knees, looking at the floor. You okay? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, he said. His voice sounded different, flatter. I asked if he wanted to continue. He shook his head. Must have just been the lights, he said. Messing with me. That wasn't what he'd been saying a minute ago. You sure? I asked. Yeah, he said. I'm good. He wouldn't elaborate anymore. Every question I asked after that got short answers, no details, no hesitation, just done. I finished the basic exam, cleared him medically. Not much else I could do. The guards took him out. That should have been the end of it. But later that morning, I checked the report. His initial statement, the part about the glass, the silhouette, it wasn't in there. Just listed as temporary disorientation due to lighting fluctuation. Nothing else. I asked one of the admin staff about it. They said that's what he told them. No mention of anything unusual. I didn't push it, but I remembered how he described it. That shape. Not matching him. Not moving the same way. A few days later, I saw him again, across the base. He didn't recognize me, or at least he acted like he didn't. Just walked past, normal, calm, like nothing had happened. But for a second, when he passed a window, I noticed him glance at it, quick, like he didn't want to look, and then look away again, just a little too fast, like he was making sure whatever he'd seen before wasn't there this time. I wasn't supposed to notice it. My name's Leah Mercer. I worked as a satellite imagery analyst for a private contractor. Most of my job was reviewing archived passes, comparing terrain over time, flagging changes, that kind of thing. It's not as exciting as it sounds. Mostly you're looking for erosion patterns, construction, things like that. You get used to the rhythm. Open an image set, compare it to the previous day, log anything that stands out, move on. This one stood out right away. It was a dry lake bed in southern Nevada. Remote, flat, nothing unusual about it. I'd looked at that area dozens of times before. Same cracked surface, same faint tire tracks from old survey work. But on this pass, there was a mark. Perfect circle. Faint, but clear enough once you saw it. I zoomed in. The edge was sharp. Too sharp. Natural erosion doesn't make shapes like that. Wind patterns don't either. This was precise. Like something had pressed down evenly across that entire area. I checked the scale. The circle was maybe 60, 70 meters across. Not huge, but not small either. Big enough that it should have left some kind of disturbance. But the interior looked almost untouched, just slightly different in texture, like the surface had been compressed. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusted contrast, the outline became more obvious. A clean boundary, no irregular edges, no breaks. I pulled up the previous image, taken the day before. Nothing there. Same lake bed, same patterns, no circle, no disturbance, just flat, undisturbed ground. I flipped back to the new image. The circle was still there. I checked the timestamp. Both images were taken at roughly the same time of day. No shadow differences, no angle changes that could explain it. I sat back for a second, tried to think of what it could be. Survey equipment, but there were no tracks leading in or out. No vehicles, no signs of setup. Even if someone had gone out there, they would have left something behind. This looked like it had just appeared. I marked it for review, tagged it as anomalous surface feature. Standard procedure. Then I moved on. But it stuck in my head. I kept thinking about how clean the edge was, how uniform. That kind of precision didn't happen by accident. Later that day, I got a follow-up task. Same coordinates. New image. This one was taken a few hours after the first. I opened it. The circle was gone. At first, I thought I'd loaded the wrong file. I double-checked the metadata. Same location, same coordinates, different timestamp. I zoomed in. The area where the circle had been was completely flat. Not just back to normal. Different, smoother, like it had been graded. I pulled up the earlier image again, compared them side by side. The texture didn't match. Before, the lake bed had those natural cracks, uneven patterns. After, it was almost uniform. Not perfectly smooth, but noticeably altered. I checked for signs of equipment, tracks, disruption, anything. There was nothing. No entry points, no exit marks, no indication that anything had moved across that surface. Just the change. Circle present, then gone. Replaced by a flattened patch. I flagged that too. Sent it up the chain. Got a response back a few hours later. Data discrepancy, no further action required. That was it. No explanation, no request for more detail, just closed. I stared at the message for a while, then went back to the images, zoomed in even further, pixel level, trying to see if there was something I'd missed. At that scale, the circle's edge looked even stranger. It wasn't just a boundary, it had a slight gradient, like the ground right at the edge had been pushed down harder than the center. Subtle, but consistent. I flipped to the later image. That gradient was gone. Everything was even, too even. I checked the time difference between the two images, less than 6 hours. In that time, something had created that circle. Then something, or something else, had removed it. Cleanly, completely, without leaving a trace of how it was done. I started pulling older archives, went back weeks, months, looking for anything similar. I found one. Same area, different date, much older, another faint circle, smaller this time, harder to see, but once I spotted it, it was there. Same kind of edge, same kind of compression. I checked the next image in that sequence, gone, flattened, same pattern. I didn't report that one, I just sat there looking at it, trying to make sense of it. Nothing about it fit, not natural, not mechanical, not anything I'd been trained to recognize. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The precision, the timing, the way it appeared and disappeared without any sign of process. The next morning, I checked the task queue. My flagged items were gone, not reassigned, not commented on, just removed. I tried searching for the coordinates again. The recent images were still there, but the ones I'd been working on, the ones with the circles, were harder to find, like they'd been pushed deeper into the archive. Not deleted. Just buried. I didn't bring it up again, didn't ask questions. But every now and then, when I was reviewing new passes over that same lake bed, I'd slow down. Look a little closer. Because once you've seen something like that, something that precise, you start wondering how often it happens. How many times something leaves a mark like that, perfect, intentional, and then erases it before anyone else gets a chance to notice it was ever there. I saw it about 40 miles north of Rachel, sometime after 2 a.m. My name's Darren Holt. I've been driving long haul for about 12 years, mostly West Coast routes. That night I was cutting across Nevada, taking 375, what people call the extraterrestrial highway. I'd driven it a few times before. It's quiet, long stretches of nothing, barely any traffic, and at night it gets so dark you can see everything in the sky. It was one of those clear nights. No clouds, no wind, just a steady hum from the truck and that endless road ahead. I remember feeling more tired than usual, but not dangerously so. Just that kind of dull fatigue you get after hours of straight driving. I had the window cracked a little to keep the air moving. Radio was on low, mostly static between stations. Everything felt normal. Then the radio cut out completely. Not static, just silence. I glanced down at it, thinking maybe I'd lost signal, which happens out there. I reached over to adjust it, but before I touched anything, I noticed the road ahead looked different. At first, I couldn't figure out why. My headlights were on full, stretching out in front of me like usual, but something felt off about the way the light hit the road. I slowed down a little, just instinct. That's when I saw it. It moved across the road maybe 100 yards ahead. Not fast, not slow, just smooth. A shape. Dark, darker than anything else out there. It wasn't blocking my headlights exactly, more like absorbing them. I sat up straighter in my seat. The thing crossed from left to right, gliding over the road without touching it. No wheels, no visible movement underneath, just sliding. At first, I thought it might be some kind of low-flying aircraft, but there was no sound, no engine noise, no rotor, nothing, and it wasn't reflecting any light. Usually, even dark objects catch something, edges, contours. This didn't. It was just a solid absence of light. I hit the brakes, slowing down more. Didn't want to get too close without understanding what I was looking at. The shape kept moving. It wasn't small either. Hard to judge size at night, but it felt big. Bigger than a car. maybe closer to the length of a bus, but flatter, low profile, like a wide slab. It passed fully across the road and drifted off toward the right side into the open desert. I pulled the truck to a stop. Engine idling, lights still on. I just sat there for a second trying to process what I'd seen. Then I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The air outside was colder than I expected. Quiet. Too quiet. I stepped down onto the pavement, keeping my eyes on where the thing had gone. There was nothing there, just open desert, flat ground stretching out under the starlight. I walked a few steps forward, squinting into the darkness. No movement, no sound, no dust kicked up, nothing. I turned back to look at the road. My headlights were still cutting across it, normal as ever. I looked up at the sky, clear, stars everywhere. No sign of anything moving. No blinking lights, no trails, nothing. I stood there for maybe a minute, listening, waiting. The silence felt heavier than it should have, like it was pressing in. I realized I couldn't hear my truck engine anymore. That didn't make sense. It was still running. I could see the vibration from the exhaust, but the sound wasn't reaching me. Or it was muted somehow. I swallowed. My ears popped slightly. That's when the sound came back, all at once. Engine noise, faint wind, even the slight crunch of gravel under my boots. I turned slowly, scanning the area again. Still nothing. I walked a few steps off the road toward where the object had gone. Shined the flashlight around. The beam cut through the darkness, but it didn't catch anything unusual. No tracks, no marks. The ground looked undisturbed. I kept expecting to see something just beyond the light, but there was nothing. I went back to the truck, climbed in, sat there for a second, hands on the wheel, trying to calm down. I looked at the radio. It was still off. I reached over and turned the knob. It clicked back on. Static came through first, then a faint station, like nothing had happened. I checked the time, 2:17 a.m. That didn't feel right. I could have sworn it had been closer to 2:05 when I first noticed the radio cutting out. I didn't remember standing outside that long. Maybe I had. Hard to tell. I put the truck back in gear and started moving again. Slow at first, eyes locked on the road. Every shadow felt deeper now. Every stretch of darkness looked like it might move. I drove another 10 miles before I started to relax even a little. Nothing else happened. No more shapes, no more silence. Just the road and the engine. But I kept thinking about how it moved. Not like anything I'd seen before. No effort, no sound, no interaction with the ground or the light. Just sliding through space like it didn't belong to it. And the part that stuck with me the most was how it didn't seem to care I was there. Didn't react, didn't avoid me. It just crossed the road on its own path at its own pace, like the highway, and everything on it didn't matter at all. And I just happened to be there long enough to see it pass through. I noticed it because the pattern didn't make sense. My name's Hannah Cole. I was doing field research on bird migration routes in southern Nevada, mostly tracking how different species move across desert corridors during seasonal shifts. It's a lot of sitting, watching, logging, and comparing movement over time. You get used to how birds behave. Even subtle changes stand out after a while. This one wasn't subtle. There was a stretch of airspace just north of where I'd set up one of my observation points, not far from a restricted base area. I wasn't allowed anywhere near the base itself, obviously, but the migration paths still passed close enough that I could track patterns from a distance. At first, I thought my notes were off. Groups of birds, mostly smaller desert species, some hawks, would approach this one section of sky and then shift. Not gradually, not like they were adjusting for wind. They'd veer. Sharp. Like they'd all made the same decision at once. It wasn't every group, but it happened often enough to stand out. I started marking it on my maps. Same general coordinates, same behavior. It didn't matter what direction they were coming from. Northbound, southbound, it didn't change. They'd get close to that patch of sky and then angle away, sometimes by 30 degrees or more. At first, I assumed there had to be something physical there. A tower, maybe. Some kind of radar installation. Anything that might disrupt airflow or create noise. But there was nothing visible. The sky looked completely clear. No structures, no cables. Nothing. I adjusted my observation point one morning just before sunrise to get a better angle on it. It was cold that day, colder than usual for that time of year. The air felt still, almost heavy. I set up my scope and started watching. Within an hour, I saw it again. A group of small birds, maybe 15 or 20 of them, flying low and steady. They approached the area, and then they shifted, all at once. No hesitation, no stragglers. The whole group changed direction like they'd hit something. But there was nothing there. I lowered the scope and just watched with my eyes. Same thing. They didn't slow down, didn't scatter, they just redirected. Clean. Instant. I checked the sky again, still nothing. I wrote it down, more carefully this time. Time, direction, species, weather, everything. Over the next few days, I kept seeing it. Different birds, different times, same behavior. It started to bother me. Not in a dramatic way, just that quiet, nagging kind of confusion. Like something wasn't lining up. One afternoon, I decided to get closer. Not into the restricted area, obviously, but closer to that section of airspace. I drove out along a service road that ran parallel to the boundary line, parked about as close as I could legally get. Got out. The ground was flat, dusty, typical desert terrain, no signs of installations, no warning markers beyond the usual perimeter fencing farther off. I walked a bit, keeping an eye on the sky. It looked completely normal, blue, clear, nothing unusual. I waited, watched. After a while, a hawk came through, higher up this time, gliding. It moved smoothly until it reached that same invisible line. Then it dipped, just slightly, adjusted course, and kept going around it. I felt something shift in my stomach when I saw that, because it wasn't just smaller birds anymore. It was everything, avoiding the same space. I took a few steps forward. Nothing changed. The air felt normal. No wind, no sound beyond the usual. I kept walking, slowly, watching the sky above me. I checked my compass. It was steady, no interference. Then I noticed something else. The sound, or lack of it. The desert is never completely silent. There's always something. Wind, insects, distant movement. But right there, in that spot, it felt muted, like the ambient noise had been turned down, not gone, just reduced. I took another step, and my ears popped, sharp, like pressure equalizing. I stopped, stood still. The feeling passed after a second. I looked around again. Still nothing. No visual cue, no distortion, just empty space. I raised my hand slowly, like I was expecting to feel something. There was nothing. No resistance, no temperature change, just air. But something didn't feel right. I can't explain it better than that. It was like standing in a place that didn't want to be noticed. I stayed there for maybe another minute. Then I stepped back. As soon as I did, the ambient sound seemed to come back. Subtle, but noticeable. The pressure in my ears didn't return. Everything felt normal again. I walked back to the car. Drove a little farther down the road, set up again at a distance, watched for another hour. Same thing. Birds approaching, veering away, none of them crossing that invisible line. I went back the next day. Different time, different conditions. Same result. After a week of this, I started reviewing my earlier data. Months worth. The pattern had been there the whole time. I just hadn't recognized it at first. Every route map showed a slight gap in that area, like a hole in the airspace where nothing flew through. I tried bringing it up with one of the coordinators I reported to. Kept it simple. Mentioned unusual migration behavior near the base. He listened, nodded, then said, probably environmental. That was it. No follow-up, no interest in looking into it. I didn't push it, but I kept going back out there, kept watching. Because once you see something like that, something that consistent, it's hard to ignore. And the part that still sticks with me is how precise it was. Not a wide area, not random. A defined space in the sky that everything alive seemed to recognize and avoid, like there was something there, just out of reach, that they could sense even when I couldn't. I noticed it because the screen stayed dark when it shouldn't have. My name's Aaron Klein. I worked refueling on a rotating night crew at a small desert airstrip. Nothing fancy, mostly routine landings, tankers, training flights, the usual. Part of my job was monitoring the incoming aircraft on a thermal scanner before they touched down. It's standard. You check heat signatures, make sure everything lines up. Engines hot, fuselage warm, normal patterns after flight. That night was quiet. Cold for the desert, maybe just above freezing. Clear sky, no wind. I was in the small control shack with the monitor running while the rest of the crew waited out by the trucks. We weren't expecting anything, no scheduled landings for another couple of hours. I remember I was halfway through a cup of coffee when the radar pinged. Single contact, low altitude, approaching from the south. I frowned at the screen. No flight plan attached. That wasn't completely unheard of, but it wasn't common either. I keyed the radio, tried to raise them. Nothing. No response. The contact kept coming in. Steady speed, straight path. I switched over to the thermal display. Expected to see the usual heat bloom. Engines would show first, then the body. But the screen was empty. No heat. No signature at all. I adjusted the sensitivity, cranked it higher, still nothing. That's when I thought the system might have glitched. I tapped the side of the monitor, checked the settings. Everything was working. The background was picking up faint heat from the ground from nearby equipment. Just not the aircraft. I stepped outside. The others were already looking up. "Got something coming in?" Marcus called over. "Yeah," I said. "You see it?" He nodded toward the sky. I followed his gaze. There it was. A shape moving against the stars. No lights. No strobes. Just a dark outline. Hard to make out at first, but once you saw it, it was clear. Wings, fuselage, definitely an aircraft, but completely unlit and silent. That's what stood out. At that altitude, you should hear something, even a distant hum. There was nothing, just the crunch of gravel under our boots as we stepped closer to the edge of the strip. The aircraft came in low, smooth, no wobble, no correction, just a steady descent. I glanced back toward the shack. The thermal monitor was still blank through the window. "Why isn't it showing?" I muttered. No one answered. We were all watching now. The plane crossed over the perimeter and lined up with the strip. Still no lights, still no sound. Then the wheels touched down. We heard that. A soft, brief contact. Rubber on asphalt. But even that sounded muted, like it came from farther away than it should have. The aircraft rolled forward, slowed, came to a stop about halfway down the strip. We stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Usually, by then, you'd hear the engine spooling down. Heat shimmer rising off the surface, something. There was nothing, just stillness. I grabbed the fuel hose and started walking toward it. Marcus followed. "Something's off," he said under his breath. "Yeah," I said. "I know." As we got closer, I expected to feel the heat. Even standing a few feet away from a recently landed plane, you can feel it radiating. This one, nothing. The air around it felt the same as the rest of the night. Cold. Still. I reached out and touched the side of the fuselage. It was cool. Not just cooler than expected. Actually cool. Like it had been sitting there for hours. I pulled my hand back, looked at it like that would explain something. Marcus did the same. "Is that normal?" he asked. "No," I said. We moved along the side. The surface felt the same everywhere. No warm spots, no residual heat, even near where the engines should have been hottest. I looked up at them. Dark. No glow. No sign of recent use. It didn't make sense. I walked around toward the front. Still no markings I recognized, no identifying lights. Nothing, just that same dark shape. I tried the radio again. No response. We stood there for a minute, waiting for something to happen. A door to open. A signal. Anything. Nothing did. Finally, Marcus said, "Should we do anything?" I didn't know what to tell him, so I just said, "Hold here." I went back to the shack, checked the logs. No entry for that aircraft. No scheduled arrival. No emergency notice. Nothing. The radar still showed the contact sitting on the strip, but the thermal display was blank. Like it wasn't there. I stepped back outside. The others were still standing near it. No one had moved closer. I walked back over, looked at the plane again. It hadn't changed. Still silent. Still dark. Still cold. I don't know how long we stood there. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 10. Then, without warning, there was a sound. Not loud. Just a low shift in the air, like pressure changing. The kind of thing you feel more than hear. I looked up. The surface of the aircraft seemed off. Not moving. Not changing shape. Just slightly different, like the edges weren't as clear anymore. Marcus stepped back. "Do you see that?" he said. "Yeah," I said. The outline blurred. Not dramatically. Just enough to make it harder to focus on. Then, in the span of maybe a second, it was gone. No takeoff. No movement. No sound. Just not there. The strip was empty. We all stood there, staring at the spot where it had been, waiting for something to follow. Nothing did. The air was still. Cold. Quiet. Like before. I went back to the shack, checked the radar. The contact was gone. No record of it leaving. No trace of it ever being there. The logs hadn't updated. No new entries. Nothing. I pulled up the previous hour. Still nothing. Like that whole thing had never happened. but I could still feel the surface of it in my hand. That cold metal, that lack of heat, the way it didn't match anything it should have been. And the part that stuck with me most was how it landed, rolled to a stop, sat there in front of us, like any normal aircraft would, except for the fact that nothing about it, not the sound, not the temperature, not even the instruments, ever confirmed that it had actually been there at all. I saw it because I couldn't sleep and decided to step out of the cab for a minute. My name's Rick Callahan. I've been driving long haul for about 12 years now, mostly running freight across Nevada and into Utah. You get used to long stretches of empty road, especially at night. That night, I'd pulled off along a quiet stretch of highway just outside a low ridge line. Not a proper rest stop, just one of those gravel turnouts truckers use when they need a break. It was late, probably around 2 in the morning, cold for the desert. Not freezing, but enough that the air had that dry bite to it. I'd been lying in the sleeper, staring at the ceiling, not really tired anymore. So I got up, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped outside. The road was empty, no headlights in either direction, no wind. Just that kind of stillness you only get out there at night. I leaned against the side of the truck and looked out toward the ridge. You couldn't see much of it, just a darker shape against the sky. I stood there for a minute, just letting my eyes adjust. That's when I noticed something move. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks. You stare at the dark long enough, things start to shift. But then it happened again. Something rose up from behind the ridge. Not fast, not like anything taking off. It didn't accelerate, it just lifted, straight up. I pushed myself off the truck, squinting, trying to get a better look. It was a shape, darker than the ridge itself. I couldn't make out details, no lights, no markings, just an outline against the stars. It kept rising, smooth, no wobble, no tilt, just vertical movement, like it was being pulled upward. I waited for the sound, engines, rotors, anything. There was nothing, not even a faint hum. The only sound was the gravel crunching under my boots as I took a few steps forward. It rose maybe a couple 100 feet above the ridge. Then it stopped, just hung there, perfectly still. I remember thinking it had to be a helicopter, but even hovering helicopters make noise. You feel them in the air. This didn't feel like anything. It just sat there, quiet. I checked the sky around it. Stars were visible, except where the shape blocked them. That's how I tracked its edges. It wasn't small, bigger than a car, bigger than anything I'd expect to just be sitting out there. I glanced back at my truck, half thinking I should grab my phone, but something about it kept me from moving. I didn't want to take my eyes off it. It stayed there for maybe 10 seconds, maybe more. Time felt stretched, then it started to move again. Not up, sideways, slow, steady, like it had decided on a direction and just eased into it. Didn't tilt, didn't turn, just shifted laterally. Same height, same speed, no change in sound, no change in anything. It moved across the sky above the ridge, parallel to the ground. I found myself walking along the edge of the turnout, following it, trying to keep it in view. The farther it went, the harder it was to make out. Not because it sped up, just because the angle changed, and the sky behind it got darker, fewer stars to outline it. At one point, I thought I lost it. Then I saw it again, slightly farther along, still moving, same pace, same silence. I remember thinking how wrong it felt. Not scary exactly, just out of place, like watching something behave in a way it shouldn't be able to. It kept going for another minute or so, then it slowed, not abruptly, just gradually. Came to a stop again, hung there, same as before. I stood there, watching it, waiting to see what it would do next. Then, without warning, it started to drift downward. Not straight down, at an angle, back toward the ridgeline. Same, slow, controlled motion. It disappeared behind the ridge the same way it had come up. No sound, no light, just gone. I stayed there for a while after that, staring at the spot where it had been, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The sky looked normal again. Stars in the same places, no movement, no sign of anything. I walked back to the truck, climbed inside, sat in the driver's seat for a minute, just listening. The cab felt louder than usual, the faint ticking of the engine cooling, the soft hum of electronics, normal sounds, but they felt different after being out there. I looked at the clock, barely any time had passed. It felt longer. I didn't sleep much after that. Kept replaying it in my head, the way it rose. the way it just stopped in midair, then drifted sideways like it wasn't affected by anything around it. No wind, no gravity the way you'd expect. And the part that stuck with me most was how quiet it was. Not just silent, but like the air around it didn't react at all. No disturbance, no pressure. Nothing. Like it wasn't really part of the same space I was standing in. I drove out before sunrise, past that same stretch of ridge, looked over as I went by. Nothing there. Just rock and dirt. Same as always. If I hadn't stopped that night, if I just kept driving, I would have missed it completely. And whatever it was would have still risen up out of sight, paused in the sky, moved across it at its own pace, and settled back down without making a single sound or leaving anything behind to prove it had ever been there at all. I saw it because I was already looking at the sky. My name's Devin Rausch. I worked satellite comms for a contractor that handled signal checks and uplink maintenance out at a remote base in Nevada. Night shifts were usually slow. Most of the traffic ran on schedule, and once everything was stable, you mostly just monitored. That night, I'd stepped outside to take a break. It was one of those dry, still nights where the air feels thinner than usual. No wind, no cloud cover, just a clear sky and a full spread of stars. I liked going out there because the equipment room had a constant hum that got into your head after a while. Outside, it was quiet. I leaned against the side of the building, looking up, not really thinking about anything, just watching satellites drift by. You get used to spotting them, tiny, steady points moving in straight lines. I just picked one out, tracking it with my eyes, when something else caught my attention. At first, it didn't register as anything specific. Just a brief change in the sky, like a flicker, but not in the way light usually flickers, more like something had drawn a line for a split second. Then it happened again, clearer this time. A thin line of light shot straight up from the ground, perfectly vertical. I blinked, thinking I'd imagined it, but I knew exactly where I'd seen it, just off to the west, somewhere inside the base perimeter. I stepped away from the wall, looking in that direction. Nothing. Just darkness. Then it happened again. Same spot. A narrow beam so thin it looked almost like a thread. It extended upwards straight into the sky. No spread, no cone, just a single tight line. It lasted maybe a second. Then it was gone. No afterglow, no fade. Just gone. I stood there staring at the spot where it had appeared, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. It didn't behave like a spotlight. There was no widening as it moved upward. No scatter in the air. The beam didn't light anything around it, didn't illuminate the ground, didn't reflect off anything. It was just there. Visible, but not interacting with anything. I took a few steps toward the edge of the building to get a clearer line of sight. My first thought was laser testing, but even high-powered lasers have some kind of visible scatter, especially at night. You see particles in the air, a faint glow along the path. This didn't have that. It was too clean, too precise. I waited. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then, without warning, it appeared again. Same place, same shape, same duration, straight up, gone. I felt a weird tightness in my chest. Not panic, just that feeling when something doesn't fit with what you know. I pulled out my phone, thinking I'd try to record it, but I hesitated. Didn't know when it would happen again. Didn't want to miss it by fumbling with the camera, so I just stood there watching. A minute passed, maybe more. Then the beam appeared again. This time, I noticed something new. It didn't start from the ground and move upward. It appeared all at once, from bottom to top, instantly. Like someone had drawn a line in the air in a single motion. There was no sense of movement, no travel, just presence, then absence. I tried to judge how high it went. It seemed to extend beyond where I could clearly track it, past the lower stars, up into the darker part of the sky. I couldn't see an endpoint, just the line fading into distance. I lowered my phone. Didn't bother trying to record it anymore. Something about it felt like it wouldn't show up anyway. I don't know why I thought that. Just a feeling. I stayed out there longer than I meant to, watching, waiting. The beam appeared maybe 5 or 6 times in total. Always the same position, same length, same instant appearance and disappearance. Between each one, there was nothing. No sound. No change in the environment. No indication anything was happening. After a while, I went back inside, sat down at my station, pulled up the logs. If something like that was being tested, there should have been a record, even internal. even restricted. There was nothing. No scheduled tests, no system activity in that sector. No power spikes, nothing unusual. I checked the external sensors, same result. No anomalies, no readings that matched what I'd seen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to convince myself I'd misinterpreted it, some kind of optical effect. Reflection. But from what? There was nothing out there that could produce a beam like that. And even if there was, it should have shown up somewhere in the data. It didn't. I went back outside once more before the end of my shift, just to see if it would happen again. The sky was the same, clear, still. I waited. Nothing. No beam, no flicker, just stars. I stayed out there until my break was over, then went back in. The rest of the shift was normal, no other strange activity, no alerts, no system changes, just the usual. Before I left in the morning, I checked the logs again. Still nothing. Like it had never happened. I didn't report it, didn't know how to, didn't have anything to show. Just what I'd seen. And the thing that stuck with me wasn't just the beam itself. It was how clean it was, how precise, no spread, no interaction, no sign that it was passing through anything. It didn't behave like light. Not the way light should. It just appeared. Perfectly straight, perfectly narrow, stretching upward from a place I couldn't see, into a sky that didn't react to it at all, and then disappeared like it had never been there, leaving nothing behind, not even a trace that anything had passed through that space. For those few seconds I stood there watching it. We noticed it because the ground lit up before anything else moved. My name's Eli Navarro. I was out hiking with my friend Marcus Dale, just a 2-day loop across a dry lake bed out in eastern California. Nothing extreme, just a long, flat stretch before cutting up into the foothills. We'd timed it so we'd cross the lake bed in the late afternoon, camp near the far side, then head into the hills the next morning. By the time we got out there, the sun was already dropping. The ground still held heat from the day, and there was that weird dusty smell you only get in places that don't see water for months. It was quiet. Not completely silent, but close. No wind, no insects. Just the sound of our boots on the cracked surface. Marcus pointed it out first. He stopped walking and said, "Do you see that?" I thought he meant something on the horizon, but he was looking down. About 20 yards ahead of us, the ground had this faint glow to it. Not bright, just enough to look out of place. At first, I thought it was the light from the sky hitting the surface at an angle, but it didn't match anything else around it. The rest of the lake bed looked dull, flat, kind of gray. That section had a soft white tone, like it was lit from underneath. We walked closer, slowly. Neither of us said much. The glow didn't spread, didn't flicker. It just sat there, a long, narrow shape, maybe 10 or 15 feet across. As we got within maybe 10 feet of it, it started to move. That's the part I keep going back to. It didn't fade or shift. It moved. The glow itself slid forward across the surface. Same shape, same brightness. Just gliding. And it didn't look like it was on top of the ground. It looked like it was under it. Like something beneath the surface was carrying that light with it. Marcus stepped back. "Okay," he said, quiet. "That's not normal." I didn't answer. I was watching how it moved. It was steady. No jerks, no changes in speed, just a smooth, consistent pace, heading away from us toward the mountains. I tried to listen for anything. Footsteps, machinery, anything that would explain it. Nothing. The only sound was our breathing. We followed it. Not close, just keeping it in sight. The ground didn't shift. No cracks opening, no dust lifting. It was like the surface stayed completely normal, while something underneath moved independently of it. At one point, the glow passed over a slightly raised section of the lake bed. A ripple in the dried mud. The light didn't distort, didn't bend. It just passed straight under it. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Up until then, I'd been trying to explain it away. Some kind of gas, heat, reflection. But none of those things move like that. None of them hold shape like that. We kept walking. The sky was getting darker now, stars starting to show. The glow stood out more, as everything else dimmed. It wasn't bright enough to light anything around it, just visible on its own. Marcus said, "Should we stop?" I didn't know what he meant. Like, just stop following it, he added. I looked at him, then back at the glow. It was maybe 50 yards ahead now, still moving. Same direction, same pace. I shook my head. I just want to see where it goes. He didn't argue. We kept going. After a few minutes, I realized something else. The distance between us and the glow wasn't changing. No matter how fast or slow we walked, it stayed the same. Always just out of reach. Not speeding up, not slowing down, just matching us. I tested it, picked up the pace, jogged a few steps. The glow moved a little faster too. Not dramatically, just enough to keep that same gap. Marcus noticed it too. Did you see that? Yeah. We stopped. The glow slowed, then stopped as well. Not instantly, just enough to feel like it adjusted to us. We stood there, both of us staring at it. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then Marcus stepped backward, one step. The glow didn't move. He took another step back, still nothing. Then he stepped forward again. The glow started moving again, same direction, same pace. That's when it stopped feeling like we were following it. It felt like it was leading us. I didn't like that. I said, let's just stay here. We stayed where we were. The glow kept going, slowly pulling away. After a minute or so, the distance between us started to increase. It didn't stop again, just continued toward the mountains. We watched it move farther and farther out. The shape got smaller, fainter, still steady, still smooth, until it reached the far edge of the lake bed, where the ground started to rise. The glow didn't change direction, didn't slow, it just kept going, right into the base of the hills, and then it was gone. No fade, no dimming, just not there anymore, like it had passed into something we couldn't see through. We stood there for a long time after that. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. Eventually, Marcus said, "We're not camping here." I agreed. We turned back, walked all the way back across the lake bed in the dark. Neither of us wanted to stay out there any longer. As we walked, I kept looking down, half expecting to see that glow again. Nothing. Just the same dry, cracked surface. Flat. Still. The next day, we checked the area from a distance. In daylight, it looked completely normal. No marks, no discoloration, no sign that anything had passed under it. We asked around later. Rangers, locals, nobody had heard anything like it. No reports, no tremors, no equipment in that area, nothing that would explain a moving light beneath solid ground. Marcus doesn't like talking about it much, says it was probably something natural we just didn't understand. I tried to go with that. But I keep thinking about how it matched our pace, how it stopped when we stopped, how it stayed just far enough away that we couldn't reach it, and how it didn't seem random. It moved with purpose. Straight line, no deviation, like it knew exactly where it was going and exactly where we were. The whole time we were out there on that lake watching something move under the ground that never once made a sound and never once let us get close enough to see what was actually there. I noticed it because the air coming out of the vents didn't feel right. My name's Colin Mercer. I did HVAC contract work across a few remote sites in southern Nevada. Most of the jobs were routine, filters, coolant levels, basic diagnostics, the kind of stuff you can do on autopilot after a while. That day, I was sent out to service a hangar that wasn't supposed to be in use. That's what the paperwork said anyway. Inactive structure, maintenance cycle overdue. Usually that means the systems are shut down or barely running. This one wasn't. I knew before I even got out of the truck. You could hear it, a low, steady hum coming from the building. All the rooftop units were running. Not just idling, running hard. I remember standing there in the heat, looking up at the roof, every fan spinning, every unit engaged. Didn't make sense. I checked the access panel inside. The place was empty. No vehicles, no equipment, no signs of recent activity. Just a big open hangar with the lights off. But the air inside was cold. Not comfortable cold. Not like air conditioning meant for people. It felt sharp. That's the only word I can think of. Like the air itself had an edge to it. I walked over to one of the vents along the wall, held my hand up to it. The air was moving fast, colder than anything I'd expect in a building that size. I pulled out my temp gun, pointed it at the airflow. The reading dropped lower than it should have, lower than the system specs. I checked it again, same result. I went back outside and climbed up to the roof. All the units were running at full output. No cycling, no variation, just constant. I opened one of the panels. Everything looked normal. No faults, no warnings. The system thought it was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, which made it worse. I shut one unit down manually, waited a few seconds. It kicked back on by itself. Not a delay, not a reset. Just came back online like something overrode the command. I tried it again. Same result. At that point, I figured I'd just log it and move on. It wasn't my job to question why a building was running like that, just to note it. I finished up what I could and left, but the air stayed with me, that feeling. It wasn't just cold, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in that space. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was staying at a small motel about 15 minutes away. Couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I got in the truck and drove back. I don't really know why. Part curiosity, part something else. The road out there was empty. No traffic. No lights except the base perimeter in the distance. When I pulled up near the hangar, everything looked the same. No activity, no vehicles. Just the hum of those units still running. I parked a little ways off, didn't want to get too close. Just sat there for a minute. Then I noticed something above the building. At first, I thought it was just a cloud, a faint patch in the sky, but there weren't any clouds anywhere else. The sky was clear, stars visible, except right above the hangar. There was a shape, oval, faint, like a thin layer of condensation. You see it sometimes over heat vents where the air distorts, but this wasn't distortion. It had edges, soft but defined. I got out of the truck, walked a little closer. The shape stayed in place, didn't drift, didn't change, just hovered above the roof, directly over where the units were running. I looked up at it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. There was no light coming from it, no reflection, just a difference in how the sky looked in that area. Like the air itself had changed. I could still see stars through it, but they looked dimmer, slightly blurred. I checked the air around me. Still warm, still dry. Nothing that would explain condensation forming like that, especially not in a perfect oval. I took a few steps closer. The hum from the units seemed louder, or maybe I was just more aware of it. I stood there, looking up, and I realized something else. The air felt different again. Not just near the vents this time. Out here, subtle but noticeable. That same sharp feeling, like the cold inside the hangar had somehow spread. But the temperature hadn't dropped. It was still warm. It was just the sensation. I don't know how to explain that. I kept watching the shape. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stayed there, perfectly still. After a while, I noticed the edges starting to fade. Not all at once, just softening. Like whatever was causing it was weakening. The oval became less defined, more like a patch than a shape. Then it was gone. No transition, no drift, just not there anymore. The sky above the hangar looked like the rest again. Clear, normal. I stood there for a few more minutes, listening to the units, watching the roof. Nothing else happened. I went back to the truck, sat there for a while, then drove off. The next day, I checked the system logs remotely. Everything looked normal. No spikes, no anomalies, just standard operation, like it had been running that way the whole time. I went back out a week later for a follow-up. Same building, same setup, but this time the units were off. Completely shut down, no hum, no airflow. The inside of the hangar felt like the outside air, dry, warm, normal. I checked the logs again. No record of them ever running at full output. Nothing. Like it had never happened. I stood in the middle of that empty space, looking up at the vents, trying to remember how it felt the first time, that cold air, that sharp edge to it, and the way the sky looked above the building later that night. That faint oval, perfectly still. Like something had been sitting there, just out of reach, just visible enough to notice for a little while before disappearing and leaving everything exactly the way it was, like it had never been there at all. I only noticed it because I couldn't find one of the stars I always use to orient myself. My name's Lucas Brenner. I worked maintenance on a base out in southern Arizona for a few years. Nothing special. HVAC, electrical, checks, the kind of stuff nobody pays attention to unless it breaks. On night shifts, when things were slow, I'd go outside behind the service buildings and just look up for a bit. It was one of the only places you could see a decent stretch of sky without too much glare. That night was clear. No clouds, no moon, just stars. I'd been out there maybe 10 minutes, leaning against the back wall, going through the same routine I always did, picking out the brighter stars, lining up constellations, just killing time. There was a small cluster I liked near the eastern horizon. Not anything famous, just a tight group that stood out because of how evenly spaced they were. I remember looking at it, then glancing away for a second. When I looked back, something felt off. Not obvious, just wrong. It took me a second to figure out what it was. One of the stars was gone. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes hadn't adjusted right. Then I realized it wasn't just one. The entire cluster was dimmer, like something was sitting between me and it. I straightened up, staring at that patch of sky. At first, I couldn't see anything, just a slight difference in how the stars looked in that area. Then I noticed the edge, a curved line, faint but there. It wasn't a shadow exactly, more like a section of the sky where the stars were being blocked out in a smooth, rounded shape. That's when I saw it, a dark oval, not solid black, just darker than everything around it. It was big, way bigger than I expected once I really focused on it. It covered that entire cluster and more. And it was moving, slowly, drifting across the sky, not like a plane, not like a satellite. There was no straight path, no steady speed. It kind of floated, like it wasn't following any obvious direction. I stepped away from the wall, trying to get a clearer view. No sound, nothing at all. The air was still, no wind, no distant engines, nothing to suggest anything was up there. I watched the edge of it pass over another set of stars. They disappeared as the shape moved over them, then reappeared behind it, one by one, exactly as they'd been before. No distortion, no flicker, just gone, then back. I remember thinking it had to be something close, some kind of object in the air between me and the stars. But it didn't feel close. There was no sense of depth. It looked like it was part of the sky itself. I took a few steps forward, like that would somehow help. It didn't. The shape kept drifting. Same slow, almost lazy motion. It wasn't in a hurry. It didn't react to anything. It just moved. I tried to track its edges, but they were hard to hold on to. If I looked directly at it, it seemed less defined. If I looked just off to the side, it became clearer, like it didn't want to be focused on. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. It's hard to say. Time felt a little stretched. At one point, I thought about going back inside to grab my phone, but I didn't want to take my eyes off it. I kept watching as it moved farther across the sky. The cluster of stars I'd been looking at came back fully as the shape cleared them. Exactly the same as before. Same brightness, same positions, like nothing had interrupted them. That part bothered me more than anything. If something blocks light, you expect some kind of change, but there wasn't any. It was like the stars were just hidden for a moment, then revealed again. As the shape kept moving, it started to blend in more. The contrast wasn't as obvious away from that dense cluster. It was still there, but harder to pick out. I had to really concentrate to follow it. Eventually, it got to a part of the sky with fewer stars, and then I lost it. Not because it sped up, not because it disappeared suddenly, it just stopped being visible. Like there wasn't enough behind it to outline its shape anymore. I stood there staring at the empty sky, trying to find it again. I couldn't. It was gone, or at least I couldn't see it anymore. I stayed outside for a while after that, waiting to see if it would come back, or if something else would happen. Nothing did. Just the same sky, same stars, everything normal again. I went back inside eventually. Didn't say anything to anyone that night. Didn't really know how to bring it up. The next few nights, I went back out at the same time, same spot, watched the same part of the sky, nothing, just stars. I even tried looking for that cluster again, hoping maybe I'd see the same thing. It was always there, unchanged. I started second-guessing myself, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a plane, no lights, no sound. It didn't move like anything I've ever seen in the sky. And the way it covered those stars, cleanly, perfectly, then let them reappear exactly the same, that's the part I can't explain. Because whatever that shape was, it wasn't reflecting light, it wasn't glowing, it wasn't even fully blocking things the way a solid object should. It was just there, drifting across the sky, visible only because of what it passed in front of, and then gone. The second there was nothing left behind it to show that it had ever been there at all. I noticed it because the map just stopped. My name's Darren Pike. I did contract work for a civil engineering firm that handled infrastructure updates for a few federal sites out in Nevada. Most of it was boring. Water lines, electrical routing, updating digital schematics so everything matched what was actually in the ground. That project had me working out of a temporary office trailer, updating old internal maps that hadn't been touched in years. The files were messy, different formats, missing layers, stuff mislabeled. Pretty normal for older systems. I was cleaning up a section that ran along the outer edge of a restricted zone. Nothing sensitive on paper, just utilities feeding into older buildings that weren't even in use anymore. At least that's what I was told. I had 3 monitors set up, flipping between satellite overlays, line diagrams, and the original blueprint scans. Everything lined up okay until I hit one section labeled Legacy System. That wasn't unusual by itself. Old infrastructure gets tagged like that all the time when nobody wants to deal with it. But when I zoomed in, the lines didn't make sense. It showed a series of underground conduits running out into open desert, not toward any structure, not connecting to anything active, just going. Perfectly straight, parallel lines, even spacing. I figured it was just outdated, something removed or rerouted years ago, so I pulled up the most recent survey layer to cross-reference it. Nothing, no trace of those lines, no soil disturbance, no markers, just flat desert. I went back to the older file, zoomed in further. The lines were still there. Crisp, detailed. Whoever mapped them originally had been precise. I followed them along the grid. They extended for about a mile, maybe a little more. Then they just stopped. No endpoint, no connection node. The lines didn't taper off or branch, they just ended, like someone had cut the diagram clean in half. That's what caught my attention. Infrastructure doesn't just stop like that. Even abandoned systems usually have some kind of termination point. A cap, a junction, something. This was nothing. I checked the layer settings, thinking maybe something was hidden, turned everything on, then off, then back on again. Still nothing beyond that cutoff. I opened the file properties, tried to trace the source. It linked to a secondary file, so I clicked it, access denied. That wasn't normal. Even restricted files usually gave you a preview or some kind of metadata. This one just shut me out completely. No explanation, no partial load, just denied. I sat there for a minute staring at the screen. Then I tried accessing it from a different angle. Went through the main directory, same result, denied. I checked my permissions. Everything was standard. I had clearance for every other file in the system, just not that one. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about it. It didn't make sense to have detailed mapping that led into a file nobody could open. Not on a project like this. I decided to flag it. Nothing major. Just a note in the system that the legacy data didn't match current records and required review. Then I moved on, or at least I tried to. But I kept thinking about those lines, how precise they were, how they just ended. Later that day, I pulled up the satellite overlay again, zoomed into the exact coordinates where the lines stopped. It was just desert, flat, light-colored ground, no structures, no visible disturbance. But something about the shading felt off. It was subtle. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. A faint difference in tone. A large rectangular area barely visible, like the ground there reflected light differently. I adjusted the contrast, then the brightness. The shape became clearer, still faint, but definitely there. I measured it, roughly the same dimensions as where the lines ended. I sat there staring at that patch, trying to convince myself it was just a natural variation, different soil composition, shadow, anything. But it didn't behave like a shadow. The edges were too straight, too even. I switched to a different date in the satellite archive. Same spot. The rectangle was still there. Same shape, same position, but in one of the older images it looked less defined. Like it hadn't fully formed yet. I don't know how else to describe it, just not as clear. I went back to the current image. The shape was sharper, more noticeable. I didn't like that. That night I stayed late in the trailer. Everyone else had cleared out. Just me and the hum of the AC unit. I pulled the files back up, compared everything again. Lines, satellite images, permissions. Same results. Around 9 p.m., I decided to step outside for a bit. Clear my head. The desert was quiet, still warm from the day, but cooling fast. I walked a little ways from the trailer, looking out toward the direction of that marked area. It was too far to see anything directly. Just open land. The sky was clear, stars starting to show. I stood there for a while. Then I noticed something. Not in the sky. Closer. On the ground. Far off in the distance. A faint glow low to the ground. Barely visible. I might not have even seen it if I hadn't been looking that way already. It wasn't bright. Just a soft, steady light. Like something was reflecting light rather than producing it. I squinted, trying to focus on it. It didn't flicker, didn't move. Just sat there. I checked my watch, thought about timing it, but before I could really process it, the glow dimmed. Not gradually, just gone, like someone had turned it off. I stood there a few more minutes. Nothing else happened. No sound, no movement, just empty desert again. I went back inside, sat down at my workstation, and without really thinking about it, I pulled up the access denied file again, clicked it. This time it opened, no delay, no warning, just opened. It wasn't a full schematic, more like a partial, incomplete. The lines I'd been looking at were there, but now I could see what they connected to, or at least where they led. A large rectangular structure, buried, no details on function, no labels, just a solid shape beneath the ground, and the lines fed directly into it. Then stopped, like they didn't go through it, didn't exit, just ended at the edge. I scrolled down looking for more information. There wasn't any. The file cut off abruptly, same as the map. No explanation, no notes. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to see if I'd missed anything. That's when I noticed the timestamp. The file had been accessed earlier that evening, right before I stepped outside, not by me. There was a user ID listed. I didn't recognize it, no name attached, just a string of numbers and letters. I sat back slowly, looked around the empty trailer. The AC unit hummed steadily. Nothing else. I clicked back to the satellite image, zoomed in on that rectangle again. It looked the same as before. Flat, faintly different from the surrounding ground. But now I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a visual difference, that something was actually there, underneath. I saved my work, shut everything down, and left. The next morning, when I came back, the file was locked again. Access denied, like before. No record of me opening it, no change logs, nothing. And the user ID that had accessed it was gone from the system completely, like it had never been there at all. I noticed the pattern before I noticed the cracks. My name's Victor Hale. I worked as a structural inspector for a contracting firm that handled maintenance checks on older facilities. Hangars, storage buildings, anything that had been around long enough to need a second look. Most of the job was routine. Check load-bearing points. Look for stress fractures. Make sure nothing's shifting where it shouldn't. That day, I was assigned to an older hangar out near the edge of a restricted airfield. It wasn't in regular use anymore. At least, that's what the paperwork said. The building itself looked fine from the outside. A little worn, paint faded, nothing unusual. Inside, it was quiet. No equipment, no aircraft. Just an empty, open space with a high ceiling and a concrete floor that had seen better days. There were a few overhead lights on, but most of the illumination came from the open hangar door. Late afternoon light angled in low, casting long, stretched shadows across the floor. I started my inspection like I always did. Perimeter first, checking the walls, columns, looking for any obvious signs of stress. Everything seemed normal. A few minor surface cracks here and there, nothing worth noting. Then I stepped farther inside, closer to the center of the hangar. That's when something caught my eye. Not the cracks themselves, the way the light fell across the floor. There was a subtle curve in it. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the sun, but as I moved, the shape stayed consistent, like a faint outline was affecting how the light reflected. I slowed down, looked more carefully. That's when I saw them. Hairline cracks, thin, barely visible unless you were looking directly at them. They formed a curve, too smooth to be random. I followed the line with my eyes. It continued. Bending gently, I walked along it, tracing it out step by step. After a few seconds, I realized what I was looking at. A circle, perfect, centered almost exactly in the middle of the hangar. I stopped, turned slowly. The cracks formed a complete ring, maybe 30 feet across. I crouched down, ran my fingers along one of the lines. It wasn't like normal cracking. There was no roughness, no jagged edges. The surface felt smooth, like the concrete had softened at some point, then settled again. The edges of the crack were slightly rounded, not chipped, not broken, just separated. I leaned closer. The color was slightly different too, a faint darkening along the line, as if the material had been exposed to heat. But there was no burn mark, no residue, just that subtle change. I stood up and took a few steps back. The ring was more visible from a distance, not because the cracks stood out more, but because the shape was so precise, too precise. Concrete doesn't crack like that. Not evenly, not in a perfect circle. I pulled out my tablet, Started documenting, photos first, then measurements, diameter, width of the cracks, spacing, everything. As I moved around the circle, something else started to bother me, the rest of the floor. Outside the ring, there were normal wear patterns, scuffs, small chips, random cracks. Inside the ring, nothing. The concrete was smoother, cleaner, like it hadn't been subjected to the same use. I stepped inside the circle, stood there for a moment. The air didn't feel different. No temperature change, no sound, just quiet. But there was this subtle sense of separation. Hard to explain, like I'd stepped into a space that wasn't quite part of the rest of the room. I shook it off, kept working, finished my documentation, marked the cracks as non-load bearing. No structural compromise, that part was true. They weren't affecting the integrity of the building. Still, it didn't sit right. I finished the rest of the inspection, checked the roof supports, the doors, everything else was standard, nothing out of place. Before I left, I took one more look at the ring, standing at the edge this time, looking across it. The light from the door hit it at a shallow angle, and for a second, I thought I saw a faint distortion, not in the cracks in the air above them, like the heat shimmer you see over asphalt. But there was no heat. The building was cool, the air still. I blinked. It was gone. Just normal light again. I didn't mention that part in the report. Just the cracks, described them as superficial, non-structural. Filed it like any other inspection. A couple days later, I got a response. Short, reviewed, no further action required. That was it. No questions, no follow-up. I checked the file again later, out of curiosity. The photos were still there, but something was off. The ring was harder to see. The cracks looked less defined, like the contrast had been reduced. I pulled up the originals I'd saved locally, compared them. They didn't match exactly. The ones in the system looked softened. Subtle difference, but noticeable. I went back out to the hangar a week later. Found an excuse to check something else nearby. Stopped in. The ring was still there, same size, same position, but it was harder to spot. Even knowing where it was, I had to adjust my angle to see it clearly. The light didn't catch it the same way, or maybe I was just expecting something that wasn't as obvious anymore. I stood there for a minute, inside the circle again, listening, watching. Nothing happened. No sound, no movement. Just an empty hangar with a floor that had cracked in a way that didn't make sense. When I left, I looked back once more from the doorway. The circle blended into the rest of the floor, almost invisible, like it didn't want to be noticed unless you were standing right on top of it. And what stuck with me wasn't just the shape, or the way the concrete looked like it had been softened and reset. It was how contained it was. Nothing outside the ring was affected. No spreading, no fractures leading away from it. Just a single, precise circle cut into the floor, as if something had been there for a brief moment. Pressing down just enough to leave a mark before lifting away and leaving everything else untouched. I noticed it because the ground changed color for a second. My name's Kyle Brennan. I did contract deliveries out in Nevada for a couple years, mostly hauling equipment between sites that didn't really have names on maps. You got used to checkpoints, long waits, and not asking too many questions. That day had been normal up to that point. Hot, dry, late afternoon. The kind of heat where the air looks like it's melting above the road. I pulled up to the checkpoint a little before sunset. Same setup as always, barrier armed, small booth, 2 guards. One checked paperwork, the other just watched. I handed over my clipboard, rolled the window down, and shut the engine off. They told me to wait. Nothing unusual. I sat there, elbow on the window, watching the desert stretch out ahead. Flat land, low scrub, distant hills. No buildings visible from that angle. Just open space. The sun was still up, but low enough that shadows were long and soft. I remember looking at the ground in front of the truck, just zoning out. That's when it shifted. Not dramatically, just darker, like a shadow passed over it. I glanced up automatically. Sky was clear, no clouds, nothing overhead. I looked back down. The ground was normal again. I frowned, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Then it happened again. This time I watched it move. A faint curve of shadow slid across the dirt, starting off to my left and moving slowly to the right. It wasn't sharp like a normal shadow. Edges were soft, blended into the ground, but it was definitely darker than everything around it. I leaned forward slightly, trying to track it. It didn't flicker, didn't break apart, just moved in one smooth, continuous motion. Too smooth. That's what stood out. Even planes cast shadows that shift and wobble a little, especially at that angle. This didn't. It glided, perfectly steady. I looked up again. Still nothing. No plane, no bird, no drone, just empty sky. I checked the guards out of the corner of my eye. The one with my paperwork was flipping through pages like nothing was happening. The other was staring out toward the road behind me. Neither of them reacted. I looked back at the ground. The shadow kept moving. It stretched longer than I expected. Not a straight line, curved slightly, like part of a larger shape I couldn't fully see. I tried to follow it to the edges, but it faded gradually into the normal light. Hard to tell where it began or ended. It passed in front of my truck, slid across the hood. I saw it clearly then. Just a subtle dimming of the paint, like someone had turned the brightness down for a second. I stepped out of the truck, didn't even think about it. Just opened the door and stood there, watching. The heat hit me immediately, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on that moving patch of shadow. It kept going. Same speed, same direction. I turned slowly, following it as it crossed the ground toward the checkpoint booth. It passed right over the barrier arm, over the gravel, over the boots of the guards standing there. He didn't react, didn't even glance down. I felt this strange disconnect, like I was the only one seeing it. The shadow reached the far side of the checkpoint and kept moving out into the open desert. I watched it for as long as I could. It grew fainter as it went. Not because it changed, just because the angle shifted and it blended more with the terrain. Eventually, it disappeared completely. Not abruptly, just faded until I couldn't pick it out anymore. I stood there for a few seconds longer, scanning the sky again. Still nothing. No movement. No sound, just empty blue and the distant haze near the horizon. "You good?" The voice snapped me out of it. I turned. The guard with my paperwork was looking at me. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Just stretching." He handed the clipboard back. "All set." I took it, climbed back into the truck, started the engine. As I pulled forward, I kept glancing at the ground, half expecting to see it again. Nothing. The road looked normal. The desert looked the same as always. I drove through the checkpoint and out onto the access road beyond it. The farther I got, the more it felt like something I'd imagined, but I knew I hadn't. The movement had been too consistent, too controlled. A few miles down the road, I slowed and looked out over the open land again, trying to see if anything else was off. Nothing stood out. No shadows, no shifts in light, just heat waves and dust. That night, I kept replaying it in my head, the way the shadow moved, not tied to anything I could see, not matching anything in the sky. Just a curved shape sliding across the ground like it had its own path. And the part that stuck with me the most was how nobody else reacted. Not the guards, not anyone. Like whatever passed over that checkpoint either wasn't visible to them or wasn't something they thought was worth noticing. Either way, it moved across that stretch of desert, smooth and silent, without leaving anything behind except the feeling that something had crossed right over us, just out of view, and kept going. I first noticed it because I thought the compass was broken. My name's Wade Hollister. I've got a small spread about 20 miles outside of Tonopah. Nothing fancy, just enough land for some cattle and a few outbuildings. Most days are the same. Feed the animals, check fences, fix whatever needs fixing. There's a dirt road that runs along the far edge of my property. It's not official, just something that's been there forever. Cuts along the perimeter where the land starts getting closer to restricted range territory. You're not supposed to cross certain lines out there, but driving near them isn't a big deal. I use that road maybe once or twice a week, mostly to check fencing on the far side. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. I had an old analog compass clipped to the dash of my truck. Not for navigation really, just something I'd always kept there. Habit, I guess. I was about halfway down that dirt road when I noticed the needle wasn't pointing right. At first, it was just off a little, then it started to drift. Slow at first, like it couldn't decide where to settle. Then it picked up. The needle started turning in a steady circle, not jerky, smooth, just spinning. I tapped the glass, nothing changed. I slowed the truck down. The needle kept spinning. I remember thinking maybe I'd knocked it loose somehow, or something inside had broken. but it didn't look broken. It looked like it was reacting to something. I kept driving. The faster I went, the steadier the spin became. Not faster exactly, just more consistent, like it had locked into a rhythm. I glanced at my phone, checked the GPS. Map was fine, position was fine, everything normal. Only the compass was acting strange. After a few minutes, I got curious. I pulled over, left the engine running at first. The needle kept spinning. Same pace, same smooth motion. I shut the engine off, sat there, watched it. The needle slowed, gradually, like something was easing off. After about 10 seconds, it stopped, settled into a normal position, pointing north again. I stared at it for a bit, then started the truck back up. As soon as the engine turned over, the needle twitched. Then it started spinning again. That's when it stopped feeling like a coincidence. I drove a little farther down the road. Same thing. Constant spin. I turned around, headed back the way I came. At a certain point, the needle slowed again, then stopped. Back to normal. I made a mental note of where it happened. Didn't think about it too much after that. Just figured there was something in the ground. Old metal, maybe. Some kind of deposit. A week later, I drove that same road again. This time, I paid attention. Right when I hit that same stretch, the needle started moving. Same pattern, same smooth rotation. I slowed down, trying to pinpoint exactly where it started. It wasn't a single spot, it was a section of the road, maybe half a mile long. Anywhere inside it, the compass went off. Outside it, everything was normal. I tested it a few more times over the next couple weeks. Same results every time. Engine on, needle spins. Engine off, it settles. GPS never changed. Phone worked fine. Radio worked fine too, though once or twice I noticed a bit of static when I was right in the middle of that stretch. Nothing consistent, just a faint crackle. One morning, I decided to bring another compass. Just a cheap one from a hardware store. Held it in my hand while I drove. When I hit the spot, it started to move too. Not as smooth as the one on the dash, more jittery, but still turning. I stopped again, turned the engine off. Both compasses slowed, then stopped, pointing the same direction. I got out of the truck, stood there with the handheld compass. The air was still, no wind, no sound except a faint hum of insects. The needle didn't move. I took a few steps away from the truck, still steady. I walked toward the center of that stretch. Nothing changed. Then I got back in the truck, started the engine. Both needles began to move again. That's when it started bothering me. It wasn't just location, it was something about the truck being on, or maybe something interacting with it. A few days later, I ran into my neighbor, Carl. He's been out there longer than me, knows the land better than anyone. I mentioned it casually. Hey, you ever notice anything weird with compasses on that perimeter road? He looked at me for a second, then said, "Yours spinning too?" That caught me off guard. "Yeah," I said. "You've seen it?" He nodded. "Been like that for years." "Any idea why?" He shrugged. "Nope." I asked him if he'd ever checked it out further. He shook his head. Didn't seem like something worth digging into. That was the end of that conversation. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started paying attention to other things. The way the air felt in that stretch. The way sound carried. One evening, just before sunset, I drove out there again. Hot day. The ground still radiating heat. You could see the air shimmering above the dirt. I slowed down as I approached the area. The compass started spinning, right on cue. But this time, I noticed something else. The heat waves. They looked different. Not stronger, just more defined, like the air was bending in a more uniform way. Hard to explain, almost like there was a shape to it. I stopped the truck, left the engine running, watched the air ahead of me. For a second, I thought I saw something move, not an object, just a shift, like the shimmer slid sideways slightly, then it went back to normal. I turned the engine off, the compass slowed, the air looked normal again. I sat there for a long time, watching, waiting. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I drove back home. The compass settled as soon as I left that stretch. Everything normal again. I still drive that road, still check the fences, and every time I pass through that section, the needle starts spinning. Same way, same pace, like something in that space is affecting it. But only when the truck is running, only when I'm moving through it. And what I can't shake is how consistent it is. Not random, not changing. Just a fixed stretch of land where something unseen interacts just enough to make the needle lose its direction before letting it settle again like nothing ever touched it at all. I only called it out because it wasn't drifting. My name's Aaron Pike. I was a radar trainee at the time, fresh out of school, still learning the systems. This was at a small airfield out in eastern Oregon. Nothing major, just a mix of civilian and occasional military traffic. Quiet most nights. I was on an overnight shift with a supervisor named Greg Dalton. He'd been doing it for years, the kind of guy who barely looked at the screens unless something was actually wrong. Most of the time, nothing was. It was around 3:10 in the morning. Cold night, clear sky, no flight scheduled for at least another hour. I was just running routine sweeps, watching the returns scroll across the display. Ground clutter, distant weather echoes, the usual noise. Then, something new appeared. At first, I thought it was just a ghost return. Happens sometimes, equipment hiccups, stray reflections, stuff like that. But this one was clean, a solid circular return. Right above the runway, low altitude. Maybe a couple hundred feet if the readout was right. I leaned in, adjusting the gain slightly. The circle stayed perfectly defined, no distortion, no flicker, just sitting there. I checked the wind data out of habit. Light breeze from the west, not strong enough to matter much. But the return didn't move at all. No drift, no wobble, nothing, just fixed in place. I watched it for a few seconds, expecting it to fade. It didn't. I glanced over at Greg. He was looking down at some paperwork, not paying attention. I turned back to the screen. The return was still there. Same size, same position. I switched to a different display mode, same thing. It showed up across all the systems. Consistent. That's when I felt that slight shift in my gut, because glitches don't usually stay that stable. I picked up the mic. Greg, you seeing this? He looked up slowly. Seeing what? I pointed at the screen. Low altitude return over runway 2. He stood up, walked over, looked at the display, didn't say anything right away, just watched it. We stood there for maybe 10 seconds. The return didn't change, didn't move, didn't fade, just held its position. You got anything scheduled? I asked. He shook his head. No. Helicopter maybe? No call-in. I checked the transponder data. Nothing. No signal. No ID. Just the raw return. Wind's not touching it, I said quietly. Greg nodded once. Still watching. Another 10 seconds passed. The return stayed exactly where it was. Same shape, same intensity. Like it was locked to that point in space. Call it out, I said, half expecting him to take over. Instead, he looked at me. You're the trainee. I hesitated. Then keyed the mic. The unidentified low-altitude return over runway 2. No transponder, no drift. Confirming visual unavailable. I released the button. The room went quiet again. Greg didn't respond right away. He just kept looking at the screen. Then he reached over and tapped the console lightly. Try recalibrating, he said. I blinked. What? System might be off, he said calmly. Run a quick recalibration. I looked back at the return. Still there. Still perfectly still. That's not a calibration issue, I said. Greg didn't argue. He just said, do it anyway. Something in his tone made me stop pushing. I pulled up the calibration menu, started the process. The system ran through its checks. Signal strength, alignment, noise filtering. Everything came back normal, no errors. I switched back to the main display. The return was still there, same position, same shape. I looked at Greg. He was already watching me. Again, he said. I hesitated. Then ran it a second time. Same results. No change. When I came back to the display again, the return was gone. Just empty space over the runway. No fade, no movement, just not there anymore. I stared at the screen. Scrolled back through the recent data. The return had been there for about 28 seconds. Then it vanished between one sweep and the next. I looked at Greg. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slightly. Log it as calibration artifact, he said. I didn't move. That wasn't an artifact. He met my eyes. Log it, he repeated. There wasn't much I could say after that. I entered it into the system. Kept the description simple, short, nothing extra. The rest of the shift went on like nothing had happened. No more anomalies, no strange returns, just the usual quiet. Before we wrapped up, I checked the logs again, scrolled back to that time. The entry was still there, but something was off. The duration was shorter, about 10 seconds instead of 28. I checked my handwritten notes. They didn't match. I pulled up the raw data. Same thing. Shorter duration, less defined, like it had been smoothed out. I didn't say anything. Just closed the window. When I got home later that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way it stayed perfectly still, no drift, no movement with the wind, no transponder. Nothing to identify it, just a clean circular return sitting above the runway like it belonged there. And the way Greg reacted, not surprised, not curious, just done with it. I worked there a few more months after that, never saw anything quite like it again. But every now and then, during those quiet early hours, I'd catch myself watching that same section of airspace, half expecting that shape to reappear, just hovering there, unmoving, unaffected by anything around it. And if it did, I had a feeling I'd be told the same thing again. Recalibrate the system, write it off, and move on, like whatever showed up there wasn't something we were supposed to look at too closely or for too long. I felt it before I heard anything. My name's Daniel Reyes. This was when I was stationed out at a remote airbase in Nevada. I wasn't on duty that night, just off shift, hanging around outside the housing units with a couple guys. It was late, maybe a little after midnight. Still warm out, even though the sun had been down for hours. One of those desert nights where the heat just sits in the ground. There were 4 of us. Me, Carter, Singh, and Nolan. Just talking, killing time before heading in. Nothing unusual. No flights scheduled that late, at least not that we knew of. The hangars were dark in the distance, a few perimeter lights on, but mostly quiet. I remember Carter was halfway through telling a story when he stopped mid-sentence. Not because he lost his train of thought, because the ground shifted. It wasn't like an earthquake. There was no jolt. It was a deep vibration. Low. Heavy. Like something massive was moving somewhere beneath us. I felt it through my boots first, then up through my legs. Loose gravel around our feet started to tremble, just barely. We all went quiet at the same time. No one needed to say anything. We were all feeling it. The sound came a second later. Not really a sound you heard with your ears, more like a pressure. A deep hum that sat in your chest. Steady. Even. Not rising or falling. Just there. I remember looking at Singh. He had this look on his face like he was trying to place it. "Do you hear that?" Nolan said quietly. We all nodded. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Maybe a little longer. Then it stopped. Just cut out. No fade. No trailing off. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. The ground went still again. The air felt normal. We stood there for a second, waiting. Nothing else happened. Carter let out a small laugh like he was trying to shake it off. "Probably something underground," he said. "Pipes or whatever." But there weren't any pipes out there like that. Not that deep. Not that strong. I looked out toward the hangars. Something caught my eye. At first I thought it was just the lights adjusting, but then I saw it more clearly. One of the hangars, one of the larger ones near the edge of the base, had a faint outline around it. Not bright, just a soft glow, like the edges of the building were being traced in light. It wasn't coming from inside. It wasn't shining outward, it was just there, hugging the shape of the structure. I pointed. "You see that?" The others turned. We all watched it together. The glow didn't flicker, didn't move. It just outlined the building perfectly. Every corner, every edge, even the roof line. For a second, I thought it might be some kind of reflection, but there was nothing around to cause it. No vehicles, no spotlights, no movement. It looked almost flat, like it wasn't lighting the building, just defining it. The weirdest part was how dim it was. If you weren't looking directly at it, you'd miss it completely. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. It stayed like that for maybe 3 seconds. Then it disappeared. Not gradually, just gone. Like someone had flipped a switch. The hangar went back to looking like every other building out there. Dark. Still. Normal. We stood there, staring. No one spoke for a bit. Then Nolan said, "Did that just happen?" "Yeah," I said. Singh shook his head slightly. "That wasn't lights," he muttered. Carter didn't say anything. He just kept looking toward the hangar. I expected something else to follow. Another vibration. A sound. Movement. But nothing came. The base stayed quiet. No alarms, no vehicles moving, no personnel running out to check anything. Everything looked exactly the same as it had before. Eventually, we headed back inside. No one really talked about it much after that. Just a few short comments, trying to make sense of it. None of it stuck. The next day, I passed by that same hangar on the way to another building. It looked normal, no signs of anything unusual, no scorch marks, no damage, nothing. I asked one of the guys who worked nearby if anything had happened overnight. He shrugged. Not that I heard. I didn't push it. Later that week, I brought it up again with Singh, just casually. He looked at me for a second, then said, "You mean the vibration?" "Yeah," he nodded. "I felt it." "And the light?" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yeah," he said. "I saw something." We didn't talk about it much after that, but every now and then I'd catch myself looking toward that hangar at night, waiting to see that faint outline again, waiting to feel that low, steady vibration roll through the ground. It never happened again, at least not while I was there. But what stuck with me wasn't just the light or the vibration, it was how controlled it felt. Like whatever caused it was contained, precise, limited to that one spot. The rest of the base didn't react, didn't respond, just carried on like nothing had happened. And for those few seconds, standing there in the dark, watching that building outlined in something that wasn't coming from any visible source, it felt less like we were seeing something happen, and more like we were seeing something briefly revealed before it went back to being hidden again. I caught it because I was bored and zooming in on nothing. My name's Tyler Marino. I work night security out at a solar facility in southern Arizona. Middle of nowhere, just panels and dirt stretching out for miles. My shift was 12 hours, mostly in a small control room watching camera feeds that never changed. It was one of those nights where the air still held heat even after sunset. You could see it on the cameras. Those little ripples close to the ground, like the air was barely settling. Around 2 in the morning, everything looked the same as it always did. Rows of panels, empty access roads, fencing, nothing moving. I was halfway through a cup of bad coffee when I noticed something on one of the outer cameras. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. The image wavered. Not the whole frame, just a section of it, like the heat distortion you see over asphalt, but stronger, more defined. I leaned forward and zoomed in. The camera sharpened, and that's when I realized it wasn't random. The distortion had a shape, not a solid outline, just a patch where the air bent differently. It stretched maybe 15 feet long, low to the ground. I watched it for a second. It moved, slow, steady, straight across the desert floor. I sat there, not really processing it at first. My brain kept trying to turn it into something normal. Wind, heat pockets, some kind of mirage. But the rest of the frame stayed stable. Only that section shifted, and it kept moving in a straight line. I switched to the adjacent camera. Same area, different angle. Nothing. Just normal ground. No distortion, no movement. I flipped back to the original feed. Still there. Still moving. I checked the timestamp. Everything was synced. No lag. I grabbed the radio. "Unit 3, you awake?" Static for a second, then a voice. "Yeah. What's up?" It was Darren. He was doing perimeter checks in one of the trucks. "Can you head towards Sector C7? I'm seeing something on the camera." "Like what?" I hesitated. "Not sure. Just something moving." There was a pause. "Copy." I watched the feed as the distortion kept sliding across the ground. Same speed, same direction. It wasn't heading toward any structure, just cutting across open desert. I tried another camera angle further down its path. Nothing. Just empty land. Then a few seconds later, it appeared there too. Same shape. Same warping of the air, like it had crossed into that camera's view. I felt my stomach tighten a little. It was consistent, predictable. Whatever it wasn't random. "Tyler, I'm near C7, Darren said over the radio. "Do you see anything?" I checked the camera. The distortion was still moving, about 50 yards from his position. "Keep going straight. You should be coming up on it." There was a pause. "I don't see anything." "Keep moving," I said. "You're close." I watched his truck on the feed. Headlights cutting across the ground. The distortion was just ahead of him now. I leaned closer to the screen. "Slow down," I said. "It's right in front of you." He slowed. The truck crept forward. The headlights passed directly through the distorted area. Nothing changed. No shadow. No object. Just light hitting the ground like normal. "It's not there," Darren said. I looked at the screen again. The distortion was still visible, still moving, right past his truck. I felt a weird disconnect, like I was watching something that didn't exist in the same space he was in. "Keep going," I said quietly. He drove forward. The distortion slipped past the edge of the headlights and continued on. Unaffected. Unnoticed. I switched to another camera further along. Same pattern. It appeared again as it entered the frame. Still moving in that straight line, always toward the same direction. The mountains. I pulled up the thermal overlay. Nothing. No heat signature, no cold spot. Just flat readings across the board, but on the visual feed, the air kept bending. Subtle but obvious once you saw it. Tyler, you messing with me? Darren asked. No, I said. I can still see it. I didn't know how to explain it better than that. It's moving past you, heading east. He turned the truck, drove parallel to it for a few seconds. Nothing here, he said. I watched as the distortion continued ahead of him. Same pace, like it didn't care he was there, didn't react at all. Eventually, it reached the edge of our camera coverage. The last camera caught it for a few seconds, then it was gone. No fade, no change, just out of view. I sat there, staring at the empty frame, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Darren came back to the control room about 15 minutes later. We went over the footage together. He watched the same screens I had, saw the same thing, the bending air, the movement, the path. Looks like heat, he said. It's not, I replied. He nodded slowly. I know. We tried to find something that matched it. Wind patterns, equipment exhaust, anything. Nothing lined up. No source, no cause. Just that one moving distortion. I checked the recordings the next day. Same footage, same timestamps, but it looked different, subtler, harder to notice, like you had to know where to look. Darren said he wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't pointed it out. A couple nights later, I kept an eye on the same area. Around the same time, the air looked normal, nothing moving, nothing shifting. But I couldn't shake the feeling, like something had crossed through there, not leaving anything behind, not interacting with anything around it, just passing through. Visible only because it bent the air slightly out of place. And the part that stuck with me was how straight the path was. No variation, no wandering. Just a clean line from one side of the desert toward the mountains, like it knew exactly where it was going, and nothing in that space, including us, had any effect on it at all. I noticed it because the sound didn't stop when I opened the door. My name's Grant Ellison. I worked maintenance at a storage facility out near the edge of a test range in New Mexico. It wasn't a normal warehouse. Most of the units were sealed, numbered, and left alone unless someone higher up signed off on access. My job wasn't to mess with what was inside anything. Just keep the place clean, make sure nothing broke down, and handle basic upkeep. That morning, I got assigned to one of the outer bays, Bay 12C. It was a long, narrow section set a little apart from the main rows. Less traffic, less lighting. The kind of place you didn't end up unless there was a reason. The order was simple. Sweep, check for dust buildup, log any issues. Nothing special. When I got there, the door was already unlocked. That was the first thing that stood out. Usually those bays stayed sealed unless someone had been in recently. I checked the tag on the handle, still marked inactive. I shrugged it off and pulled the door open. The smell hit me first, not strong, just that faint metallic scent you get in places that stay closed too long. The bay was mostly empty, a few pallets stacked against the wall, some covered crates, and one large metal container sitting off to the side. Rectangular, about 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, solid, dull gray, no markings except a small printed label. I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was something outside. A distant machine, low, barely there. I stood still, listening. The sound didn't change, didn't fade, just a steady, soft hum, but it wasn't constant. There was a rhythm to it. A pulse, slow, even. I took a few steps farther in. The sound got clearer. Still quiet, but more defined, like something repeating at a fixed interval. I glanced around the bay. Nothing was running, no equipment, no lights except the overhead strips. The sound wasn't coming from the walls either. It felt more centered. I walked toward the middle of the room. The hum stayed steady. Same rhythm, same volume. I stopped again, listened. Then I noticed something. The sound wasn't filling the space. It was directional, subtle, but there. I turned my head slightly. The hum shifted, got a little stronger when I faced one direction, weaker when I turned away. I followed it, step by step. Each time I adjusted my position, the sound lined up more clearly. Until I was standing right in front of that metal container. Up close, the sound was unmistakable. A low pulse, not mechanical, not like a motor. More organic. That's the word that came to mind, even though it didn't make sense. It had a cadence, like something repeating on its own. I stood there, staring at the container. The surface looked normal, no vibration, no movement, just smooth metal. I put my hand on it. It was cool. same as the air in the bay, but the moment my palm made contact, I felt it. Not through the air, through the metal, a faint, steady thump, in sync with the sound. I pulled my hand back, stood there for a second, then pressed it against the surface again. Same thing. Pulse. Even. Measured. Not fast, not slow, just steady. I leaned closer, listened. The sound seemed to come from inside the container, not echoing, not bouncing, just there, contained. I stepped back and looked around again. Still nothing else in the bay. No power running to the container, no cables, no vents, nothing that would explain it. I walked over to the wall and grabbed the inventory clipboard, flipped through the list, found the entry for the container, same number printed on the side. Description field was short, just one word, empty. I stared at it for a second, then looked back at the container. The sound was still there, still pulsing. I checked the list again, same result, empty, no notes, no flags, nothing. I went back over to it, knocked on the side once, twice. The sound didn't change, didn't respond, just kept going, same rhythm. I crouched down, put my ear closer to the surface. The hum felt louder there, not in volume, just in presence, like it filled more of my awareness. I stayed like that for a few seconds, listening, counting the pulses, 1, 2, 3. The spacing was consistent, almost like a heartbeat, but slower, more deliberate. I stood up quickly. Something about that comparison didn't sit right. I stepped away from the container. The sound faded slightly with distance, but it didn't disappear. It stayed centered on that spot. I walked to the door, opened it. The sound didn't follow me out. It stayed inside. As soon as I stepped into the open air, it dropped away completely. Silence. I stood there half in, half out of the bay, listening. Inside, the pulse continued. Outside, nothing. I closed the door. The sound cut off instantly, like flipping a switch. I opened it again. The hum came back, same as before. No delay. I stood there, holding the door, trying to figure out what I was dealing with. Then I closed it for good, wrote up the cleaning log without mentioning the sound. Just noted the condition of the bay, nothing unusual. That's what I put down. I didn't go back in after that. Later that day, I checked the inventory system again. Pulled up the container, still listed as empty, no updates, no access records, nothing. A week later, I passed by Bay 12C again. The door was sealed, new tag, different status, restricted. I didn't stop, didn't check it again, but every now and then I think about that sound. That steady, measured pulse coming from inside something that wasn't supposed to hold anything at all, and the way it didn't echo, didn't vibrate the room, just stayed contained. Like whatever was making it was meant to be kept inside, out of reach and out of sight, with nothing on record to say it was ever there at all. I didn't even notice it at first. I was just going through the images like I always did. My name's Eli Mercer. I was working with a small wildlife research team tracking nocturnal movement patterns out in the Nevada desert, a few miles outside the restricted area. Nothing fancy, just motion-triggered cameras, some GPS tagging, basic observation. We had a cluster of cameras set up along a dry wash that animals used as a natural corridor. Coyotes, jackrabbits, sometimes the occasional mule deer. The cameras snapped photos every time something moved through their field of view. Most mornings I'd sit in the trailer with a laptop, dumping the SD cards and skimming through hundreds of near-identical shots. Sand, brush, more sand. Sometimes a blur of fur. That morning was no different. It was still early, just before sunrise. Cold for the desert, that kind of dry chill that sticks to your skin. The sky was pale, just starting to lighten at the edges. I had a cup of coffee going cold next to me and a folder open on the screen. Camera 4, the one pointed toward a low ridge with a clear view of the sky above it. I clicked through the images quickly. Nothing. Nothing. A rabbit. Nothing. Then I paused. There was something in one of the frames. Not obvious, just off. I went back one image. Nothing there, just stars. Went forward again. There it was, a faint shape cutting across the upper part of the frame. I leaned closer. It wasn't bright, didn't glow. If anything, it was darker than the sky around it, but not completely black. More like a dull metallic gray. Curved, like part of a larger arc that extended beyond the frame. I zoomed in. The edges weren't sharp, but they weren't blurred either. It looked solid, defined, but faint enough that you could miss it if you weren't looking directly at it. I sat back for a second, trying to figure out what I was seeing. First thought was a bird. but it didn't match. No wings, no motion blur, just a smooth, continuous curve. I checked the next frame. Gone. Back to empty sky. Stars in the same positions. No streaking, no light trail, nothing to suggest movement. I flipped back and forth between the three images. Before, nothing. During, this arc. After, nothing again. I checked the timestamps. They were normal, about 5 seconds between each shot, same as always, which meant whatever that thing was, it appeared and disappeared within that window, or moved through the frame in a way that only registered for that single capture. I zoomed out and looked at the full image again. The rest of the scene was unchanged. The ridge, the brush, everything exactly the same, only that arc in the sky. I called over Jenna, one of the other researchers. She came over, still half asleep, wrapped in a jacket. "What's up?" I pointed at the screen. She squinted. "What am I looking at?" "That," I said, flipping between the frames. She leaned in closer. "Wait, what is that?" "Exactly." She stared at it for a while. "Plane?" she said. I shook my head. "No lights, no trail, and it's curved." She didn't respond right away, just kept looking. "Satellite?" she tried. "Wouldn't look like that," I said, and it'd be in more than one frame. We went quiet for a bit, just staring at it. Finally, she shrugged. "Probably something weird with the sensor," she said. "Glitch or something." That made sense on paper, but it didn't feel right. The rest of the image was clean, no distortion, no noise, just that one shape. I saved a copy of the file, made a note of the timestamp. Then I kept going through the rest of the images. Nothing else stood out. Everything else looked normal. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back out to the camera location just before midnight. Didn't tell anyone. Just grabbed a flashlight and drove out along the dirt track. The sky was clear, no clouds, stars everywhere. The kind of sky you only get out there far from any city. I parked near the wash and stepped out. It was quiet. No wind, no insects. Just that wide, open silence. I looked up, trying to match the angle from the photo. The ridge was easy to find. The camera was still there, mounted low on a stake, pointed upward at the same spot. I stood next to it, looking at the same section of sky. Nothing unusual, just stars. I waited, not sure what I was expecting. 5 minutes passed, 10. Then something else caught my attention. A faint flicker. Not in the sky, on the ground. I looked down. The sand in front of me looked different. Hard to explain, like the texture was shifting slightly. I crouched down, ran my hand over it. It felt normal, dry, loose. But when I looked at it from an angle, I noticed something, a very faint line, curving across the surface, barely visible. I followed it with my eyes. It extended out into the wash, a smooth arc, similar shape to what I'd seen in the sky. I stood up slowly, shined the flashlight along it. The beam caught it just enough to make it visible. It wasn't a track, no indentation, just a subtle change in how the sand reflected light, like something had passed over it, not touching it, but close enough to disturb the surface in a uniform way. I followed the line a few steps. It kept going. Same curve, same faint shift in texture, then it faded, blended back into the normal sand. I turned off the flashlight, stood there in the dark, looking up again. The sky looked unchanged, still, silent. But there was this feeling now that whatever had shown up in that one frame hadn't just been in the sky, it had been here, passing over the ground, leaving just enough of a trace to be noticed if you were looking at the right angle. I waited a little longer. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I went back to the truck, drove back to the trailer, didn't mention what I'd seen. The next morning, I checked the camera again, pulled the new images. Nothing unusual, just the same empty stretch of sky, same stars, same timing between shots. I opened the original image again, looked at the arc one more time. It was still there. Same faint metallic curve, perfectly still, like it had never moved at all. Just appeared for that one frame and nowhere else. I noticed it because the ground felt wrong under my boots. Not soft, not unstable, just different. My name's Lucas Reed. I worked as a surveyor for a private contractor doing mapping work across sections of desert land that didn't get much attention. A lot of it was routine. Grid layouts, elevation checks, marking boundaries for future development that may or may not ever happen. That week, I was assigned to a dry lake bed about 40 miles out from anything resembling a town. Flat, wide, and empty. The kind of place where you can see for miles in every direction. and still feel like you're standing in the middle of nowhere. I got there late afternoon, set up my equipment, started working while there was still light. Everything was normal. The surface was hard-packed clay with a thin crust of dust on top. You could hear the crunch under your boots, feel how solid it was beneath. I was walking a straight line, checking points when I stepped into it. At first, I thought I'd just hit a patch of looser dirt, but when I shifted my weight, it felt warmer. Not hot, just warmer than everything else around it. I stopped, looked down. The ground didn't look any different. Same color, same texture, no marks, no discoloration. I crouched and placed my hand on the surface. There was definitely heat there. Subtle, but noticeable, like the ground had been sitting in sunlight longer than the rest. Except the sun had already dropped behind the hills, and the rest of the lake bed was cooling off fast. I checked the surrounding area, stepped a few feet back, put my hand down again, cold, normal. I moved forward, back into the spot, warm again. I stood up and looked around, trying to get a sense of the shape. It wasn't random, the warmth was contained. I walked slowly, feeling for the edges with each step. After a minute or two, I realized what I was standing in. A circle. Perfect. I paced it out, roughly 25, maybe 30 feet across. The temperature difference wasn't huge, but it was consistent all the way through. I took out my thermal reader, pointed it at the ground. The numbers confirmed it. A few degrees higher than the surrounding surface. Not enough to raise alarms on its own, but enough to be strange, especially at that time of day. I marked the boundary with small flags, just to see it more clearly. When I stepped back, the shape stood out more, not visually, but mentally. Knowing it was there made it impossible to ignore. A clean circle in the middle of an otherwise uniform lake bed. I checked for any signs of disturbance. Tracks, scorch marks, indentations, nothing. The surface was intact. No sign that anything had physically pressed down or altered it, just that faint, contained warmth. I stayed there until the light faded completely, watched as the rest of the ground cooled. The temperature dropped fast once the sun was gone, but inside the circle it held, still warmer, still consistent. At one point I crouched down again and kept my hand there for a while. It felt steady, not cooling, not fluctuating, just maintained. I packed up after dark, drove back to the temporary camp a few miles out. Didn't say much to the others, just noted it in my logs. Localized thermal anomaly. That's what I wrote. It sounded technical enough. The next day I went back. Same spot, same setup. The circle was still there, and it was still warmer. Not as much as the night before, since the sun had been on it again, but as the afternoon wore on, the difference became noticeable. Same shape, same size, no change. I spent more time examining it that day. Tried to dig a small sample from just outside the boundary, normal, dry, cool. Then I moved a few inches inside the line. Same material, same consistency, but warmer. No difference in composition. No obvious source of heat. I even checked below the surface, dug down a few inches. The warmth persisted. It wasn't just surface level. It extended slightly into the ground, but it didn't spread outward. The boundary stayed sharp. I walked the perimeter again, slowly. The edge was precise. One step, cool. Next step, warm. Like crossing an invisible line. That night I stayed longer, sat near the edge, watched the stars come out. The lake bed went quiet, no wind, no movement, just that wide, open silence. And the circle, holding its heat. At one point I thought I heard something. Not a sound exactly, more like a low vibration. Faint, almost below hearing. I stood up, looked around, nothing. The horizon was empty, the air still, but the feeling lingered for a few seconds, then faded. I didn't mention that in the report. By the third day, I figured I'd document everything properly. Took detailed measurements, photos, thermal readings at different times, covered all the bases. That afternoon, I drove back to camp, uploaded everything, and sent it off. The response came back faster than I expected. Short, received, no further action required. That was it, no questions, no follow-up, which was unusual. Most anomalies, even minor ones, got at least a second look. I went back out the next morning, same spot, same coordinates, but when I got there, something was off. The ground looked different, smoother, more uniform. I walked closer. The flags I'd placed were gone. No sign they'd ever been there. The surface had been graded, freshly. You could see the faint lines from the equipment that had passed over it, flattened everything out. I stood there for a minute, trying to process it. Then I stepped onto the area where the circle had been. The warmth was gone. The ground felt the same as everywhere else, cool, even, undisturbed. Whatever had been there, whatever had held that heat, was gone, or buried, or erased. I checked the surrounding area, no tracks leading in or out, no equipment, no signs of activity beyond the grating itself, which looked recent, within the last day. I went back through my notes later, looked at the photos again. The circle was clear in them, undeniable. But standing there in that same spot, there was nothing left to show it had ever existed. Just a smooth stretch of desert floor. Flat, cold, and empty, like it had been reset, after something had been there long enough to leave a mark. And just long enough to hold its warmth, before disappearing without leaving anything behind. I didn't even notice it at first. I was just going through the images like I always did. My name's Eli Mercer. I was working with a small wildlife research team tracking nocturnal movement patterns out in the Nevada desert, a few miles outside the restricted area. Nothing fancy, just motion-triggered cameras, some GPS tagging, basic observation. We had a cluster of cameras set up along a dry wash that animals used as a natural corridor. Coyotes, jackrabbits, sometimes the occasional mule deer. The cameras snapped photos every time something moved through their field of view. Most mornings, I'd sit in the trailer with a laptop, dumping the SD cards and skimming through hundreds of near-identical shots. Sand, brush, more sand, sometimes a blur of fur. That morning was no different. It was still early, just before sunrise. Cold for the desert, that kind of dry chill that sticks to your skin. The sky was pale, just starting to lighten at the edges. I had a cup of coffee going cold next to me and a folder open on the screen. Camera 4, the one pointed toward a low ridge with a clear view of the sky above it. I clicked through the images quickly. Nothing. Nothing. A rabbit. Nothing. Then I paused. There was something in one of the frames. Not obvious, just off. I went back one image. Nothing there. Just stars. Went forward again. There it was. A faint shape cutting across the upper part of the frame. I leaned closer. It wasn't bright, didn't glow. If anything, it was darker than the sky around it, but not completely black. More like a dull metallic gray. Curved, like part of a larger arc that extended beyond the frame. I zoomed in. The edges weren't sharp, but they weren't blurred either. It looked solid, defined, but faint enough that you could miss it if you weren't looking directly at it. I sat back for a second, trying to figure out what I was seeing. First thought was a bird, but it didn't match. No wings, no motion blur, just a smooth, continuous curve. I checked the next frame. Gone. Back to empty sky, stars in the same positions, no streaking, no light trail, nothing to suggest movement. I flipped back and forth between the three images. Before, nothing. During this arc, after nothing again. I checked the timestamps. They were normal. About 5 seconds between each shot. Same as always, which meant whatever that thing was, it appeared and disappeared within that window, or moved through the frame in a way that only registered for that single capture. I zoomed out and looked at the full image again. The rest of the scene was unchanged. The ridge, the brush, everything exactly the same. Only that arc in the sky. I called over Jenna, one of the other researchers. She came over, still half asleep, wrapped in a jacket. "What's up?" I pointed at the screen. She squinted. "What am I looking at?" "That," I said, flipping between the frames. She leaned in closer. "Wait, what is that? Exactly." She stared at it for a while. "Plane?" she said. I shook my head. No lights, no trail, and it's curved. She didn't respond right away, just kept looking. "Satellite?" she tried. "Wouldn't look like that," I said, and it'd be in more than one frame. We went quiet for a bit, just staring at it. Finally, she shrugged. "Probably something weird with the sensor," she said. "Glitch or something." That made sense on paper, but it didn't feel right. The rest of the image was clean, no distortion, no noise, just that one shape. I saved a copy of the file, made a note of the timestamp, then I kept going through the rest of the images. Nothing else stood out. Everything else looked normal. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back out to the camera location just before midnight. Didn't tell anyone. Just grabbed a flashlight and drove out along the dirt track. The sky was clear, no clouds, stars everywhere. The kind of sky you only get out there, far from any city. I parked near the wash and stepped out. It was quiet. No wind, no insects, just that wide, open silence. I looked up. The trying to match the angle from the photo. The ridge was easy to find. The camera was still there, mounted low on a stake, pointed upward at the same spot. I stood next to it, looking at the same section of sky. Nothing unusual, just stars. I waited, not sure what I was expecting. 5 minutes passed, 10. Then something else caught my attention. A faint flicker. Not in the sky, on the ground. I looked down. The sand in front of me looked different. Hard to explain. Like the texture was shifting slightly. I crouched down, ran my hand over it. It felt normal, dry, loose. But when I looked at it from an angle, I noticed something. A very faint line, curving across the surface, barely visible. I followed it with my eyes. It extended out into the wash, a smooth arc, similar shape to what I'd seen in the sky. I stood up slowly, shined the flashlight along it. The beam caught it just enough to make it visible. It wasn't a track, no indentation, just a subtle change in how the sand reflected light, like something had passed over it, not touching it, but close enough to disturb the surface in a uniform way. I followed the line a few steps. It kept going. Same curve, same faint shift in texture. Then it faded, blended back into the normal sand. I turned off the flashlight, stood there in the dark. Looking up again, the sky looked unchanged. Still, silent. But there was this feeling now, that whatever had shown up in that one frame hadn't just been in the sky. It had been here, passing over the ground, leaving just enough of a trace to be noticed if you were looking at the right angle. I waited a little longer, nothing else happened. Eventually I went back to the truck, drove back to the trailer, didn't mention what I'd seen. The next morning I checked the camera again, pulled the new images, nothing unusual. Just the same empty stretch of sky, same stars, same timing between shots. I opened the original image again, looked at the arc one more time. It was still there. Same faint metallic curve, perfectly still. Like it had never moved at all, just appeared for that one frame and nowhere else. The lights turned on before I even reached the door. I was halfway down the service stairwell when I saw the glow spill under the exit at the bottom landing. That hallway shouldn't have been lit unless someone was in it. Motion sensors controlled the whole stretch. My name's Darren Cole. I worked as an electrician on contract at a maintenance facility tied to a larger base. Not the main runway side, this was one of the older buildings, mostly used for storage and occasional equipment servicing. Night shifts were common for us. Less traffic, fewer interruptions. That night was quiet, just me and one other guy somewhere on the opposite end of the building. I'd been up on the roof checking a ventilation unit that kept tripping a breaker. Nothing unusual. I finished up, packed my tools, and headed back down. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't just on, it was moving. I opened the door slowly and stepped into the corridor. The lights were switching on one by one down the length of the hallway. Not all at once. Sequential. Like something was walking through, triggering each sensor in turn, except there was no one there. The corridor was straight, about 50 meters long. Concrete walls, low ceiling, exposed piping along one side. No corners, no blind spots. I could see the entire stretch, and it was empty. But the lights kept coming on. Click. A section lit up about 10 feet ahead. Click. Another further down. Each one staying on for a few seconds before dimming again, then going dark. Behind the last lit section, like something was moving away from me. I just stood there, watching it happen, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a wiring issue, faulty sensors, but the timing was too clean, too consistent. Each light activated at the exact same interval, same distance apart, same delay before switching off. It reached the end of the hallway. The last light flicked on, held for a second, then went out, and everything was dark again, except for the dim emergency strips along the floor. I waited. Nothing happened. I walked forward slowly, checking each sensor as I passed. They looked fine. No loose wiring, no visible damage. I waved my hand in front of one. It clicked on immediately. Normal response. I stepped back. It stayed on for a few seconds, then shut off. Exactly as expected. I continued down the hall, half expecting something else to happen. Nothing did, just the hum of the building. Air moving through ducts, distant mechanical noise. At the end of the corridor, I turned around and looked back. Everything was dark again, like it had never happened. I didn't say anything to anyone that night. Figured I'd check the system logs in the morning. Maybe there'd be a record of sensor activity. Next day, I pulled the data. Every sensor in that corridor had triggered, one after another. Perfect sequence, timestamp down to the second. But there was no corresponding access log, no door entries, no personnel movement, nothing. I mentioned it to Rick, one of the supervisors. He shrugged. Probably a glitch, he said. Old system. That made sense, on paper, but it didn't sit right. A few nights later, I was back in the same building. Different job, same corridor. This time, I was ready for it. I finished up early and waited near the stairwell. Just stood there, leaning against the wall, watching the dark hallway. Around 1:40 a.m., it happened again. Same pattern. The first light clicked on halfway down the hall, then the next, moving in a straight line. Steady pace. I stepped out into the corridor this time, walked toward it. The lights kept activating ahead of me, but I couldn't catch up. No matter how fast I moved, the lit section stayed just out of reach, always about 20 feet ahead. Then, for a second, something changed. One of the lights flicked on closer than